Hey everybody, happy Saturday and happy birthday to someone. My son, his girlfriend's dad asked him how old I was and he told him I was 53. um, like, now you're off by a decade, son. But today I have Noah Adam with me, formerly Veritas48, although I'm trying not to introduce you too much of that as that, but inevitably people, giving them some context in your past. You were a pretty big YouTuber a couple of years ago in the Christian community. Seemed like you garnered a lot of respect and admiration from all sides. So welcome.
Thank you for having me, and happy birthday. Happy birthday. I cannot believe we're doing this on your birthday. I feel like it's like I have to give you a gift or something. I have no idea what to do here.
I was going to be either guilting you or Ozzy, depending on which week it fell into, into doing the show. So thank you. So as mentioned, you were active. How many years were you active as a Christian YouTuber on YouTube?
Oh man, so from 2006 to the end of 2012, so 6 years. Wow, that's insane when I think about it. Yeah, I had about 14,900 subs by the time it ended. Yeah.
If you had taken my subs, you would have gotten over 15.
Well, you have like these milestones. I have like 200 and you have like these milestones. Like 270. Atheists always had like big numbers. Like the people I interacted with, Garrett, like Sisyphus Redeemed, or Theoretical Bullshit, they're like 30, like way up there. And I was loving when they would make responses to me because I'd get like 300 boosts a day. I was like, oh man, look at this. Yeah. Anyway, that was when my ego took control.
300, man.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm just scraping by here. I'm busting my nuts over here. Trying to get yes, I got four off of that one video. That's awesome.
I know, right? Like your day's made. You're like, I'm getting double digits, baby. Watch it.
The advantage is I know all of my subs by name. So I can keep it real personal that way. I like it small. I try to keep it small. That's crazy. I didn't realize it was that much. I figured you had 6 or 7 or something. I think Ozzy has like 6, and I consider him to be pretty big, but man, I guess maybe things have changed or communities have spread out a little bit or something. But back then there were a lot more response videos and whatnot. So
yeah, the medium was very, very, very different. It's a shame that Ozzy never made a video response to me. I always just wanted a response from Ozzy. Always. I don't know why he didn't do it. I was waiting every day. Anyway, yeah, it was a very different medium back then. It was a lot easier to make responses.
I think he was scared. I'm going to guess. He was scared.
He was going to humiliate me with his logic.
That's why he doesn't do videos for Jadlo. So, sorry, I'm just ruminating on my own jokes here and thinking how good that was. So how many videos had you created?
Oh my word. I have them all on my hard drive. I think I had well over 300. Yeah, I had a lot.
And so I guess we could, I don't want to jump the gun, but I'd be curious to know whether you go back and watch them and cringe, or if you have ones that you're like, oh, that was pretty good still.
Yeah, I go back, and the first thing you notice is, damn, that guy's like amazingly good looking. Oh, that's me. But I realized, no, I've been saying this to a lot of my friends. I'm working on a project where I'm actually responding to myself. Like now that I've deconverted, like I'm responding to Veritas48 and doing like a back and forth, and I'm making it kind of humorous. Like, I know what you were really thinking when you said that kind of stuff. So I've been doing that for like a year, but I haven't like actually finalized a video. I've been really busy, but I have it like, I have the project all saved, so I'm working on it. Like my 5 questions for Atheist video. I did a video on like, how could you live if you like meaning and value if you're an atheist? And now that I kind of know the answer, I'm kind of responding to myself. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. It'd also be interesting to reflect on what you were missing about it, or how did you not see it otherwise? Or obviously, you're coming from a different worldview is substantially different, or a different perspective, or starting point. But but even just to break down your own failures in inferential practices or whatever, to be able to have that on record and being able to see that. Now, the only thing that I have, I think, from my Christian days is my wedding, and my wife will not watch our wedding now. We have it on tape, and she refuses to ever view it again.
Really? Why
now she's gonna.
Specifically?
I'm just gonna say that she's gonna watch our interview here, and she's gonna tell me I'm flat wrong, because anytime I cite anything that about her or whatever, I get in deep shit about it. But it's because it was, I was in a Bible church in Ohio on the Ohio State campus, and was a very different person in many regards back then, and my wife was as well. And she has some, I would say, is more resentful of some of that time than I am. But when she looks back, she's not fond of what she sees, although we haven't watched it. So I'm sure I'm crying like a baby up there as we had our small church wedding, and we're citing verses, and I'm feeling incredibly guilty and crushed, but also really joyous as well, and was probably just a bag of emotion. So not that I'm not still a man that's a bag of emotions, but
yeah, no, we're gonna make you cry by the end of this hangout. That's the goal. Totally.
I'm fighting the background. I can't say that without smiling, so I kind of give away the gag right away. So
we're actually, I just want to say, we're kind of in a similar boat. My wife and I haven't watched our wedding video since it happened, the event, the baby eating, the deconversion. We actually weren't allowed to dance at our wedding. We had it at a Baptist wedding. Like, we did it the traditional way, like waited till we were married, all that stuff, very serious about it. And like went to a Baptist wedding, didn't dance or anything. So it's kind of like, I'm just scared to watch it at this point. I'm just kind of like, whoa, like that seems so foreign to me now. It was almost 10 years ago. So yeah.
I think I'd be a little, I wouldn't have a problem watching it. I think that it would mainly be that I would look at myself and see a very passionate, and I don't mean that this is going to sound just terrible, but just naive. I mean, I was just naive at the time. And it was very early in my life. When you think about it, I was when I got married, I was maybe 3 or 4 years. I got married when I was 22, I think. So it was like 4 years after I left my parents' home, and I took on a whole other life, and really went in deep first. I'm not a guy that does things kind of half. I'm either super lazy about things, or I'm all in with it. And I was all in with that. There was nothing lazy about that period of my life for about 10 years. And I think I would look back at that and go, okay, there's a guy who really latched onto something that had a lot of good things about it that resonated with him, and he went all in with it. And I don't think I'd do it differently. But it's kind of that's youth for you a little bit. And I'm not trying to say that, there's a bunch of old atheists out there and all Christians are these young, naive folks who are just taking positions too early. But when I look back, it's hard for me not to look at that and to think that. So so you had a fairly public deconversion, and when we get into this, one thing I'm going to have to keep in mind is somebody had mentioned, they're like, can he speak to this theoretical bullshit deconverted me thing? And not that you're saying that, but that's everyone's impression out there. And
yeah, that's
whoever
so
this
odd.
was that was saying it thought it was
so strange. Yeah, so I'll start really quickly with my deconversion. I mean, I don't think it's as public as I think people make it out to be. Like, I never really did a real in-depth video about it. I think I did one with Scott where we talked about the argument from non-belief. It's been so long, I don't even remember everything I said in that video. But that's the closest I think I've really opened up about it publicly. Like, I've made some videos, and I have a private Facebook group where I think I posted some of them there. But yeah, like my deconversion happened after my YouTube life ended, really. Like my last video was a Christian video on YouTube. It happened shortly after I left YouTube. I, you know, basically moved from Texas to California. And it was in that transition where just a lot of stuff happened, man. Like a lot of stuff went down.
I get just for the record, I get a lot of the oh, you moved to California, right? So
yeah, that's it. Liberals, yeah. I immediately became a lib. I'm super gay now. No, it's all actually I'm joking, but there's actually people that I know in Southeast Texas that have like warned me like, oh, be careful of the gays and the liberals and everything. And I'm like, wow, I basically lived I lived on the buckle of the Bible Belt, like the actual buckle that has the cross on it. That's where I lived. So kind of crazy stuff over there. But in terms of TBS,
by the way, you can get sun lotion that like gives you dual protection on that. By the way, so like, you can go for walks in the California sun and not get the gay. So
yeah, it's really hard. It's according to the people in Texas, it's everywhere, man. It's hard. Yeah. So I'm actually from Long Beach, which is like super gay. So anyway, yeah. So TBS, you know, him and I have been. It's not just him, actually. I've been friends with him. I've been friends with Prof MTH, Mitch. I'm really close friends with him. Jasper Avi, Avi Bueno, Urban Elf, Adam. So a lot of the people, Garrett, Sisyphus Redeemed. So a lot of those people that I interacted with on YouTube. Some of them I reached out to when I deconverted. The first was Mitch, Prof MTH, and the second person was Scott. But there was a period of a year and a half where I never talked to Scott, I never talked to Mitch, I never really talked to any of my YouTube friends that were atheists. I tried to focus most of my time on my Christian friends and working through this issue I was having theologically and spiritually. And so I did the evangelical thing, right? Put on the full armor of God, reach out to, study the scriptures, reach out to your Christian friends, reach out to pastors. So I did that for a while. But yeah, I mean, I think I've done some videos with Scott, and I think people think like, oh, that he must have done it. Scott had some really, really good videos, some very persuasive videos. And while I give him credit for probably winning the arguments, deconversion is a much more complex process than just not being convinced of natural theology. Like it's way deeper than that. And I would classify my deconversion as having a kind of intellectual side to it and a spiritual or theological, or maybe for lack of a better term, existential side to it. And I think that was the side that did most of the work. I think my intellectual stuff was a slow degradation over time through dealing and interacting with the secular community on YouTube. I had a lot of really good responses to videos that I made, and they challenged me and made me think really deeply about these things. So in that sense, sure, I think maybe Scott played a part. So did a bunch of other people, to be honest with you. But I think that part of my deconversion was less known to me and it maybe was happening behind the scenes, as it were. Like I think I slowly became less convinced of certain arguments, but I think what did the work is just not hearing from God for like a really long time when I really, really needed to. And I think that combined with real intellectual struggles, with arguments that I once found persuasive, sort of combined and slowly pulled me out to sea, to which, one day I woke up and had to sort of say, I just don't believe this stuff anymore. So I think part of it is intellectual. A good amount of it is existential, spiritual. And yeah, I can't really say one person deconverted me. I think it was a very long, drawn out process that was very multifaceted. And I don't mind talking about any of those different parts if you want to go into them.
Yeah, I definitely do. Just on the time frame, was that I noticed in some of the videos that I'd seen since, there were some comments of you having not made a video or not feeling I think maybe even Scott in one of his videos suggests that you're not as motivated to make videos or something like that. There was a comment about that you had dropped off a bit in terms of making of videos or something. Was that during that time that's what people were referencing, or did your account get hacked or something? Or
yeah. Yeah, so the way it went down basically is actually I had to go to the I had to go to the police. Actually, I had threats. I made some videos about somebody sending me like messages saying, hey, like here's your address, your wife's address, their work address, your parents, I should say my mother-in-law's address, like their socials, like all this information that's really hard to find. And you know, it wasn't a distinct threat to it, but it was obviously meant to sound threatening. And I eventually got my YouTube hacked. I got my email account hacked at the same time, and I was able to get all of it back, but I just decided I'm not going to make videos anymore. Like I have all the content, saved all my videos. I have them all on my drive, but I just never felt the motivation to come back. And, you know, I was kind of at that time that's when this stuff was starting to happen intellectually with me. And I was kind of doubting the things I was saying on YouTube. So I just, you know, and I was going to move soon. So I just was like, I'm not going to do this anymore. I think even then I had intentions to maybe one day come back and do videos, but I just took a very, very long break that ended up being permanent. I think that comment from Scott was in our non-belief video, I think. I'm trying to think of when that video came out, but that may have been when I was at the tail end, or maybe even had at that point would classify myself as an atheist. I can't recall when that was, but yeah. So, I mean, I have all the videos. I actually have, for like the nerds out there, the Veritas48 fandom out there, if you exist, I actually have like 4 or 5 videos I never released, and I cut them and edited them and actually put them in this group that I'm a part of, just for like shits and giggles. I actually made a response to Scott and Prof MTH, and it's from like 2013, and I totally tore into Prof MTH. I was a complete ass in this video, and we're like really good friends since then. Like we've met and hung out in real life many times and whatnot. And so I sent it to him, and he was like, "That video really pissed me off. Like super pissed me off." So, yeah.
So in terms of your, you were kind of an evidentialist, or into the talking about naturalism, theological arguments rooted in naturalism and in natural theology and philosophy, and you're not part of the precept crowd, which I'm sure we'll get to talking about that at some point. But the where were the cracks forming, or what were the things that were starting to knot you, or how did that process begin for you?
Yeah, I think behind the scenes, I just felt like a lot of just think of, I don't know, like the Kalam argument, right? Like a lot of the justifications for different premises in the Kalam argument, I just found less and less persuasive. A lot of the arguments that I would think about, that I would read about, that I would throw out, I just felt slowly, I was like, these responses are making much more sense to me than my responses and my justifications and my challenges to their challenges. You know, Kalam relies heavily on an A theory of time, which I think has a lot of problems. And you know, a lot of the people that I know that are scientists and physicists are advocates of B theory of time, and think that A theory is loaded with problems. You know, I've always kind of felt weird about the sort of timeless causation component to the Kalam, right? That you know, a timeless being initiated or acted or created, and I don't think Bill's response or William Lane Craig's response is necessarily sufficient to address that. So I slowly started to doubt the Kalam. I started to doubt the moral argument. I used to be a moral objectivist. I'm no longer a moral objectivist. I don't think I am, at least. You know, the Euthyphro dilemma started to make more sense. The answers to the Euthyphro dilemma started to make less sense. And I think, you know, there's this weird part of being a Christian apologist where even when you see responses that have a lot of merit, that make you go, oh man, that's a really good response, I should really think about that, your immediate inclination is to put up your dukes. And I think that makes the process of taking their arguments seriously and legitimately thinking about them and absorbing them, it takes longer for that to happen, because your posture is like Street Fighter 2 mode. You're ready to put in your quarter and be like, let's do this. And it doesn't even matter if they're necessarily saying something that is right to you, you know. So I think I noticed towards the tail end of my videos, a lot of my responses would go something like this. I would say, you know, that's a really good point. Let me think about it. And I meant it. And I did think about it. and now I'm an atheist. So it's like, so I slowly started to feel like there were cracks with the axiological argument, with the kalam argument. I never really was persuaded by the ontological argument, but there's a very high probability it's because I didn't understand it. Just throw that out there. So yeah, I mean, I felt like, a lot of people made really good responses to me, and I thought about those responses, and I felt like the responses to those responses were insufficient. And, what do you do from there, right? Like, it's not as simple as going, oh, like all of these arguments that I used to justify my theism and my, and even deeper level, my Christian faith, they're wrong, right? But it's not like you just suddenly go, okay, like the world's the same now. I'm no longer, I don't know, I'm no longer, there's no longer any good reason in my mind to be a theist. Like, it's not like there's no weight to that, right? There's an unbelievable amount of gravitas that goes into that. And it makes any kind of movement from one religious perspective to another extremely difficult. And I think that's why for the last 3 years, I've still sort of been honing in like my actual views on things, my views on morality, right? Not the views that I'm given through a narrative, through a canon, through Christian theology, or at least what I took to be the correct version of Christian theology. So yeah,
that's one reason why I really like the your different there are different analogies given for kind of these propositional frameworks. And the one that I really like is I like the raft, the notion of the raft, where because you're out in the ocean, right? And so you're trying to change these major beams on your raft out while trying to keep the ship afloat, essentially. So you have beams that rest on top of them, and those are kind of easy to kind of swap in and out. But once you're kind of getting into the hull and these critical pieces, you have to continue to stay afloat while you're trying to swap these things out. And so it's a really messy process. There was something else that you said. Oh, so I think that these kind of these apologetics have an influence in undergirding our faith, but they're not the thing that they can kind of come and go. But the experiences that you've had that have led you to your beliefs, you didn't come to Christianity through the Kalam, for instance.
Oh God, no.
Right? Yeah. Christianity through other means, and then the Kalam becomes kind of a support that helps give some explanatory power to the things you already believe. How do you see? I'm curious what you think in terms of these things are you're starting to see that these are kind of bad things, but or bad arguments, or they're thin. But in these going away, there's a more core aspect that remains, that it's really when that starts falling apart, or when you look back on your experiences and you start to question how it is you're explaining them. And whether those were adequate explanations for what was going on to you. Like, for instance, my conversion into Christianity was full of joy and had several weeks of like immediate change. Like, I changed overnight in terms of my behaviors and everything else. I was just a totally different person than I had been previously. That was going in. And so I always looked back on that and saw that as a real moment of conversion, that I was a new creature in Christ, undergoing sanctification and a process of removing a lot of things. But later on, as I got more reasons to think otherwise, eventually those no longer sufficed as that explanation no longer sufficed for me. It wasn't. I could start to actually impugn that notion, or that I could start to think of that differently. Do you want to talk about that a little bit for you? Because you're talking about these arguments, but then you have kind of these. They're not the reasons you came to faith in the first place.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the arguments, the reasons that we would give, really, and a lot of the ones that I would interact with were really just reasons to believe in a God, right? I'm sure probably some of them were could be isolated to the Christian God, but a lot of those arguments that I found persuasive were really arguing for the existence of a kind of Western theistic monoconception of God, and that was kind of it. That said, I think it's kind of a weird connection because certainly I do want to say that the removal of those, the confidence that I have in those reasons to think that God exists certainly had an influence and an impact on the way I saw my spiritual life. Like if I think I hit at a certain point where I was like, if there really is no good reason, like intellectual reason to think there's a God, then does that make me doubt my experiences? Does that give me sufficient reason to maybe doubt what I feel when I pray? Maybe there's another explanation for it. So I think they're certainly connected in some level. I think they can interact together, but absolutely. I probably, and I know there's many people like this who all of the arguments for God's existence could be completely destroyed and they would still have a robust faith that is fine. I could never be a fideist. I could never, to me, I always had to, I felt like the Christian, you're going to use this word, the Christian worldview, which I hate using. The Christian faith to me had a component of an intellectual component to it, right? Loving God with all your mind, that's in there. And to me, that meant having a thoughtful life, having a thought life, a life that is centered around Christ and that is well-learned, well-studied. I mean, to me, that was like being a 70. It was being a well-rounded Christian. It was being one that was spiritually developed, intellectually developed, morally developed, right? These were the virtues that seemed central to me. And so to me, I certainly did tie having a kind of apologetic as a part of my faith. But yeah, I mean, theologically, I did not come to the faith at all through arguments. I came through a very deeply personal experience, that had nothing to do with my thought life. I lived in a fairly violent home. I had very violent parents. They had a lot of problems growing up. I was put into foster care when I was 13. They were both drug addicts, very violent. And when you're in an environment like that, all the way up until your teen years, you kind of need some larger story to connect yourself with, I think, in terms of making it. God to me was a very much needed thing to get through really awful nights. So that, I think, plays a big role. Getting rid of that later on is a lot harder to do when you come into it with that degree of when you're throwing yourself deeply as you can into a belief system like that. So yeah, I mean, I wasn't doing the apologetics thing till I was maybe 16, 17 years old. Yeah. Yeah.
The support that gave you in your youth is a really hard thing to discount or to disparage or to, those are the things that are very difficult for me in terms of, I think ultimately people are better off with the truth, as I see it, which for myself right now is a world where there is no God. But that doesn't mean that I don't think that religion hasn't been served a purpose, right? And so
Sure.
It becomes very difficult to figure out or to the issues of what is the case and the problems that it leaves for humans in terms of dealing with hard situations or whatnot, or the lack of maybe an answer or lack of some hope that there's something beyond it. The hope sometimes is an important aspect of it, even if there's nothing actually behind it. And that's an interesting issue, I find.
Yeah, I mean, there's some people I would just flat out say I'd rather see them believing happily along in their life this false belief than to present them with the truth, because the truth would be devastating to them in a way. At least what I think is the truth right now would be devastating in a way that I think would hinder them heavily. And I don't say that for everybody. I mean, I'm thinking like grandparents, old people that just are kind of like, the old time religion that don't really do anything, aren't really socially active. It's just something that gets them through their life. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I when I was a Christian, I used to say that there was a sense in which my dedication to the truth, like, outweighed my dedication to God. And that always kind of tripped me out, even when I was a Christian. Like, if I came to believe, and I eventually did, that there is no God, that I would follow that I mean, maybe as if I had a choice. Like, it's all if you believe something is true, it's not like you get to go, oh, let me believe this guy is, made of cheese or something. Like, you can't just. But at the same time, yeah. I mean, to me, and I think a lot of people think this way. I think a lot of apologists would even think this way, that there's a sense in which we're kind of all, I think, to some degree, maybe baseline set to adopt true belief, to aim for true beliefs, to shoot for true beliefs. And in my case, that happened even if that trumped who I thought at the time was the creator of all things truth with the capital T. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think dissonance definitely messes with us, and that once we have some suspicion that things may not be as we think they are, we're going to pick at that, and eventually want to have some way to integrate it into a coherent framework or some understanding that makes sense to us. We had talked a little bit before, and actually I think maybe in when I was reaching out to you to talk about this subject, is the narrative one builds afterward, or the trying to ascertain what it is that was going on, what was operative in you, but as well there's a phenomena of granting a lot of I think after the fact, years after the fact, atheists, people who have deconverted, can look back and go, these are the reasons. And it's interesting, is it's probably very similar to conversion as well. It's probably similar for any time we're retelling or going back and recalling how something happened. We're using a lot of current information to inform it, something that was probably a lot less clean and cut and dry than what that was. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, certainly, yeah. I mean, there's a sense in which it's still kind of unclear when I look back. I
guess you're still in that 3-year period.
yeah. It's 3 years, and I'm still kind of going through that.
I'm sorry, Junior. It's been like 15 years for me. So you'll get there.
Yeah, old man Bert. Thank you for your wisdom, old man Bert.
Pat you on the head. Yes. You'll get there. Oh, you still think that? Oh.
Yeah, silly you. Yeah, in like 15 years, I'm gonna make a response to this response to my Veritas48, but I'll be doing it as a Muslim. Like, to know the atheists, to know the But yeah, I don't know, man. It's hard for me to answer. I still, I think, a lot of the experience was, I'm still figuring out. Like, I think I'd said this maybe to you before, or somebody else, that it kind of is, I would classify my experience of deconversion differently now than I would have like 2 years ago, when I was maybe a year into it, which is interesting. Like, if we would have had this conversation 2 years ago, I would have said that I just slowly found myself out in the ocean one day, and I woke up and there was no land in sight. That'd be the analogy I would use. That I just slowly found myself out here, and I was like, what the hell? Like, how is this happening? And it seems so obvious now to say that I had a very deep existential struggle combined with just not finding any real conviction in these arguments anymore. But it took me like a long time to figure that out. That sounds so weird probably to a lot of people, because you would think, oh, it's really easy. If you're an atheist, you kind of know why you're an atheist. If you're not a Christian anymore, you kind of know why. And sure, you sort of do, right? I mean, I could definitely say to you 2 years ago, like, I'm having doubts about these. I started having doubts about these, but there's a sense in which it happens to you, right? Like, I don't know if I'm it's like you just sort of, you don't choose it, right? You certainly don't choose this. It's something that just to a certain extent happens to you. And that's not like a cop-out or anything, but it's the best way I could sort of characterize it.
It's actually not unlike your conversation with your exchange with Scout on disbelief, right? It's beliefs are not chosen. They're things you're persuaded of. You experience them. You have beliefs formed within you, and you don't have control over them. When I present you with my mug, good luck not believing that I'm showing you a mug. And so when you have these things that you're experiencing, and you're coming to understand things a certain way, my own deconversion was not something that when I realized it was that I had questions that I thought were going to be potentially problematic, and I had a number of them. And I think there had already been a number of holes forming, or that I'd been in conversations over, not specifically about religion, but my mind had been changing. And I think that there was the death by 1,000 paper cuts a little bit. I can look back and I can attribute it to a 6-month period where I really was looking at the nature of behavior and of sin, eventually concluding that sin was bullshit and that it wasn't that there wasn't a coercive force that brought death into the world, that that was just behavior. It was us being social animals that weren't perfect, and that there wasn't a prior perfect state from which we fell. And that was, when I look back, the thing I put my finger on. But that was part of a bigger transition that was going on within me, where there were a number of things that were changing in the way that I viewed people and the way that I viewed the situation we're in.
Exact same thing happened to me. Same thing happened to me.
But I couldn't, like you're saying, with the ocean is a perfect example, right? You kind of, or even like losing track of where you go out, go for a walk and you kind of lose track of where when you're walking on a beach and it all kind of looks the same, and then you kind of lose track, and you don't realize when you lost track of where you were, or whatever. Or going out in the ocean and all of a sudden, oh wait, where'd the land go? I didn't notice that. The experience was that I came to a point where I had these questions, and before I underwent the journey of looking into these things, actually getting some materials and trying to get a full view of what it is I'm struggling with. It was a little like piling analogy on top of analogy. I'd always said that it was like I was standing so close to a map, and I knew I kind of had to step back to get a look at the whole thing, but that I mightn't realize there's more to the world than my small little part I was looking at. And do I really want to take that step back? Or can I move on with this and just not go there? And I just couldn't do it. I couldn't. I actually spent a good 2 to 3 weeks actually before I started that process, because I had to figure out if I could just go on, or was I going to be okay kind of continuing along the line and just let this kind of fall away. And it wasn't going to go away. So I had to kind of, it was like, okay, well, the truth is going to take me to the truth. Whatever's out there, when I look into it, by getting more information, I'm going to be better off, not worse off. And if it's the case that Christianity is the case and that sin is real, I'm going to find that. I'm going to, I shouldn't be worried about it. Let it happen then. And, but what if it doesn't? Right. And that's the part that was really terrifying to me, because I had a wife and kids, and it wasn't just them. It was also that I wasn't stashing away some secret sin. I wasn't cheating on my wife. I didn't have anything that I wanted for. There's no tragedy. Nobody had died. I didn't have something I needed to explain. It was very different. And the first question I got from people was, what happened? Right? What triggered this? Yeah. And I couldn't look back and say that I was unhappy about it or anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you said something interesting. You said, that and I mirror this also in my own experience, where there's a moment where you have a doubt, you have something that is gnawing on your head, and you have to decide whether to go backwards and ignore it, or to like just chew on it and go forward as hard as you can and draw out, whatever happens, that sort of thing. And I had many opportunities to do that during my time on YouTube that I just turned around and said, I'll think about it, and I never really did think about it. And it was only when I really decided to chew on some of these really meaty things that, this is like Noah and Bert's analogy hour. This is what I'm realizing. It's what, but it was only when I started to really, really chew on those things, I'm just going to go with that, that I realized that it's a very horrifying but wonderful experience to follow the truth wherever it leads, even if it may lead you to the collapse of your entire system of belief and everything you've built on top of it, right? Nietzsche would call that living dangerously, right? That you're reevaluating your values, that if it comes to that, you're willing to reevaluate your values. And that is, to me, a kind of rebirth, right? That's kind of like being born again. To me, there's a sense in which my deconversion has been more spiritual to me than my conversion, than all of the stuff I've built off of my conversion. I've had a better relationship with my wife because of my deconversion. It's allowed us to have strands of conversation that we just simply could not have before when we were in the context of you know, like a Christian marriage. It wasn't just me and her, it was me, her, and God. And I had to lead and be like God, and I had to submit to God, and she had to submit to me. And there's these roles, there's these placeholders where you got to throw yourself in there, and you have to behave a certain way and act a certain way and put certain things first. And so when that's removed, it allows for all manner of different conversations about what now, right? It's the absolute destruction of oneself. If you've invested, I think, as much time in the faith as you and I have, it sounds like you have just as much as I have, you know, and it's a horrifying yet wonderful experience if you can make it through it. If you can make it through that kind of dark cavern, which I think Russell would say is part of it, right? That dark cavern, that dark night of the soul, right?
Yeah, I want to riff off of that for a second. There were a couple of things you said in there was, I can't remember the first one. I'm just going to start with the second one. Was that the experience
okay, you're getting up there in age, so we'll forgive you. Memories going today. Yep.
That's what I need. I need these analogies to help me like remember this. So I was going to say life is like a box of chocolates, and the experience of after I had kind of gone through that, I remember it as being like about a 6-month period. I'm pretty certain it was. I remember I was telling it right away afterward that there was this kind of 6-month period through the fall that kind of led me to this point. And when I finally, I think I'd probably been was no longer a Christian or no longer believed well before that. But the point where I was actually walking to work one day, and I remember actually which street I was on and the portion of the street I was on. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, so is this it? Do I really not? Yeah. You know what? I don't believe that anymore. And that was, I don't think it was freeing. It was this experience of freedom and this experience of happiness to be able to confess that to myself. But I don't think that was, I don't want that to be misconstrued or misunderstood to be that I was happy I was no longer a Christian.
Sure.
I think it was that I was in this period of uncertainty and not sure where I was. And it could have been the other way, right? Like my point is that moment of going through that, when you have that whole beam being lifted out of your raft to get the other one in and it's finally secured, and you look and you're like, okay, we done? Yeah. Oh, we're done. Yeah. Look at that.
Yeah. You made it over a hurdle, right? You made it over a hurdle, and that's worth being happy about. But I completely understand what you're saying. It's not necessarily happiness that you're no longer a Christian. It's happiness that you've made it past where you were at and where you didn't necessarily want to be. It's funny. The other thing, sorry.
No, go ahead. Let me finish one. I'll just finish one more thing, and don't forget that you're much younger than me, sir. I'll go first. The other thing was that you talked about was the experience with your wife and being able to have these conversations. And I don't know if this is the case for you, but for me, these weren't conversations that I was itching to have before that I wasn't having. That would be the wrong way to take that. I know exactly what you're talking about. It was places you wouldn't even have thought to go with your conversations. For myself, it wasn't that I had all these topics I couldn't touch because, oh, well, God wouldn't want me talking about that. Mm-hmm. But the drama that was lifted, this like just being honest and it's not that I was being deceitful before, but it was more of an opening of my world to really, it was very rich, and it was very, there wasn't it wasn't that there were conscious concerns before that I would be entering into a conversation that I didn't want to go into or whatever. It was more that there wasn't, I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it. Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so it's kind of like looking at your relationship with your spouse as like you're in a play, right? And God's kind of the director. God's the one who says, I want you to stand here. I want you to stand here. And there's a sense in which over time that can be kind of stressful, right? Just like we can imagine actors being a little stressed, being told, go here, read this line, do that, right? And then suddenly if you realize there's no director, it's like you got your own play. Like there's a whole,
Yeah.
now I can stand over here. Like now you can, like how there's entirely different types of things we can do in a context like that, talk about, way we can sort of map out our lives, the way we want to raise kids. Like there's for me, like we don't have kids yet, so it's maybe a little different, but that's kind of the way I look at it. We'll just continue these analogies for 3 hours.
The other interesting thing about that, it's funny because talking to you, I'm recalling conversations I had probably 5-10 years ago, and never gotten to it this deep with someone before, that where it's like, oh, I'm remembering all these emotions from the time. But the experience of my Christian friends found it odd that I said that I felt like I was a lot less self-centered when I became an atheist. And part of it was that I was no longer filtering this through this grand narrative involving me. And there's this thing that won't shut up the whole time that you're going through life. And the fact that it was just kind of gone there. That was this, oh man, I mean, the funny thing is that like Christians are going to hear this and they go, oh yeah, that was the spirit leaving him. Yeah, he must have been really happy.
Moment. That was the moment the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit took place. That was it right there. That was it. And the other thing that's going to happen is that the atheists that are watching this are going to be like, the atheists that have been atheists their whole lives, that have just never been Christians, are going to be like, these guys are like, this is like melodrama. Like what, this isn't hard. Like this is the easiest thing in the world. Like what is this, right? Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But I felt there was a lot less trauma and a lot less I was a lot less self-absorbed. It really was just kind of like the world's, things are going on and I'm enjoying it and I find meaning in things. It's not to say that my life lacked significance or that it within it, or that things no longer meant anything, but it didn't have, it's said the director left and then you're like, hey, what do you want to do? Let's do some improv, right? Like,
yeah, no, it's a great way to put it. I never actually had enough self-insight to say that I became less self-centered. My wife actually told me that after I deconverted. She actually said, one day she looked at me and said, like, you're seriously a different person. Like you're much less self-centered, and which is odd, right?
You'll see that you'll see that around year 6.
Yeah. But I mean, it's kind of odd, right? Like you would think, it seems so counterintuitive. You would think that in a system where these virtues are stressed and where all things are made new and you're living in light of Christ, that you would think that it would create in you maybe a less self-centered person. But maybe it does for some people. It certainly didn't for me. I don't know. Yeah, part of it may just because you're trying to, when you're a Christian and you're taking it seriously, you're married and you're newly married for the first time, like you're trying to do it so right. You're trying to draw within the lines. You know what I mean? Like you're really, really, you're within a system and trying to adhere to the lines of those systems, to that system. And I think when you realize, whether it's true or not, but when you deconvert and you realize that there really is no system, that you're not part of a canon, that you're not part of these structures of in some sense, structures of domination, if I want to throw a big old phrase like that out there, it makes you more relaxed, It makes you, you don't have to fear, am I doing this right? Because right no longer means what some other being wants me to do it, how they want me to do it, excuse me. So, I mean, it makes it kind of less stressful. The other thing you said that was really interesting is you were walking down the street when I think you said when you hit the point where you kind of, it happened to you where you maybe realized like, yeah, is that right? Like, is that the moment where you kind of, if you could peg a moment, was it when you were like walking down a street where you said, I just don't believe this anymore? It was during that.
It was an admitting of, okay, I think that I knew that I'd gotten close, but I'd never really said it to myself. I'd never really had the, you know what, yep, I am. And it was actually after I had told my wife. So, we actually had, there was a given night that I remember where I was tossing and turning, and it had been one of many, many nights for months that I couldn't get solid sleep. I don't know that people understand how much for me, it tore me up. This
Oh yeah.
This was not something that I was enjoying. It was not a place that I wanted to be. Ignorance was bliss. And I wouldn't have said that at the time. I didn't think I was ignorant at the time. I thought I was in possession of right beliefs. But there was a point where I wanted to go back. I wish I could just have the answers and have it lead to where I was. And I was worried that this was going to mess everything up. I had 3 kids. My son's middle name is Spurgeon, right? Like I was,
That's some dedication, my friend.
I was in love with, at the time, with Jesus, right? Or my concept of Jesus. I had very rich moments I could look back on that I still can look back on. I can remember sitting in summers in hayfields or tall grass near my house. There was like some state property overlooking a lake, and I would sit out there and read my Bible in the summers, and I would come to tears often because I was reflecting and believed this was all real, believed that with all of my heart, these things, and ruminated on them, and they were rich for me. They really molded who I was. They changed how I looked at myself, how I looked at others. I was sincere and devout about it. I had no desire to part with that. And so when I had these nights of just struggle, and I'd walk to work and I'd think about these things, I was like, what am I going to do? Not in terms of how am I going to save my marriage, but we're happy and we're going to church every Sunday, and I'm no longer believing this stuff, and I want to believe it, but I'm not anymore. So what do I do about this? And she one night was like, why can't you sleep? And it was like, it wasn't, why can't you sleep tonight? It was kind of like, all right, are you going to tell me what's going on? Kind of conversation. And we turned on the lights and had a conversation, and she cried about it. And we kind of decided that we would take our time from that point and both look into it, that she would look into it on her own. But that I was going to continue looking into it. And I wasn't there yet at that point, and you got there later.
Yeah. Wow. That's heavy. That's really heavy. Yeah. I mean, I've had, our experiences are very similar. I mean, I had a period of like 3 nights where I had literally 3 nights, man. I did not sleep. I clutched my pillow, and it was one of those like just really awful times where I felt like if I was going to go to sleep, I may die. Like I felt like I was going to die. And if I died, where would I go? Right. You have that fear, the fear of hell that becomes more apparent as you sort of slide away. It's interesting. I had that I can actually pinpoint, and this may sound crazy, but I can pinpoint the moment it happened for me too. I was in a movie theater and I was watching the movie The Gray with Liam Neeson. Okay, which at the time I thought was just going to be a film about like wolves eating people, right? Like it's not a film about wolves. I'm just going to throw that out there. Like it's a film about death. That's what the film is about. And I'm like thinking I'm going into it like I'm just going to go like watch another Alive, right? Like Alive Part 2 or something. Everyone's going to die in a plane crash, right? So I'm watching it and I realize that my last thread that took me out of the faith was death, fear of death, fear of dying, non-existence. And before that, the fear of hell. So it was what happens to me if I'm wrong, that conversation I was having with myself. And then what happens if I'm right? Like what happens if I'm wrong and I go to hell because of this decision? What happens if I'm right and I just don't exist when I die? And that was my last struggle before I could really peg myself with a different label and actually look in the mirror and go like new path, new time. This is different. And I was in the theater and I watched the very end of that movie. And I kind of don't want to blow it for everybody, but I think I will anyway. Whatever. Happy birthday.
I haven't seen it by.
Yeah. Oh, if you haven't, then maybe I shouldn't blow it. It'd be nice.
No, I like the happy birthday. We'll do it for my birthday.
Yeah.
I've seen it though. I've seen it though.
The end of that film, I just remember like I think everyone else was kind of nervous at the end of the film in the theater, and they were kind of like whatever. And I'm just like bawling. I'm bawling my eyes out. I'm one of those like crazy people that goes to movies alone. Do you know what I mean? Like a lot of people think that's nuts. I go to movies alone all the time. I wear a hoodie. I look psycho. It's awesome. It's a little thing I do. So I'm sitting there. I got like my hoodie on, and I'm like bawling tears, and because I had realized that my last real fight was coming to realize that death is final, and what that means for me. That life can exist in a number of different ways before my 410, before my final moment, and knowing that it's in my hands, that the way I live my life is going to be just a single occurrence, at least as far as I'm starting to find myself believing. And so the finality of that became so apparent to me. And it was one of those things that I just had to chew and embrace and go, okay, what follows from this? Let's tear down this building, right? Nietzsche has a line that says, if something's shaky, you knock it over. And that was the day like my entire worldview got knocked over. I realized that in that theater at that time by myself with my hoodie on, crying like a little loser in the movie theater. That was the moment. That was the moment it all went away from me. But to the day I die, I'll never forget that. It was just like the day I came to believe, honestly. Which I don't know. It sounds a little.
So what was the next day like for you then? What were you? Were those tears of joy, of resolution, of?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a mixture. It was fear. It was resolution. It was what next, right? What new games am I going to have to invent in order to sort of to kind of be worthy of this thing that's happening now? Like, what do I do? Like, how do I guess the exciting part and the tears of joy part was like I know that. I mean, I was already sort of under a period of self-reinvention where you're asking yourself, what do I believe about morality now? What do I believe about meaning and value, right? Like, am I going to be like, oh shit, what is that guy's name? God, philosopher, apologists love to cite him. He's like, what is his name? He's all about like, oh, there's no God and I can't wait to die and all that shit. Like all the doom and gloom that you would expect an apologist to sort of like, am I going to do that thing? How am I going to do this? How am I going to atheist? Right? Like, I think that's the good way you put it. How am I going to atheist?
Oh, that was actually the way you put it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, it's a good question. Right? Like,
but I picked up on that. I thought that was a great way to put it, is that there's the support structure is not there, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's you have to build. That's the other excitement. That's the other tier, is now you got to rebuild, right? You got to rebuild relationships in a lot of ways. Certainly with my wife, I had to do that. You have to rebuild arguments and conceptions. And I don't know, the best part of my deconversion, one of them is just learning to do philosophy without the restrictions of classical apologetics on your back. I mean, when I was an apologist, I would bastardize philosophers in order to make a point that fit the narrative of my Christian apologetics, man. And without those constraints, I felt much free to come to my own conclusions about, morality. I was a moral nihilist for a while. It's just like I came to change a lot of my beliefs, and that was incredibly exciting. And I knew in that moment that was going to happen. I bet you there's a lot of people out there that have deconverted that have just been like, what the fuck? Like, I'm an atheist now, and like never have, like, it didn't affect them, didn't bother them, right? And I am not one of those people. I just gonna throw that out there.
Yeah. I definitely had to dig back in and things, and it was a long. It's an inordinate amount of work getting the other pieces of your raft swapped out. And it's a process that there's a examining evidence is in the chat here, and he's been kind of going through some of that in terms of he had a channel called Modern Apologetics, and recently rebranded to Examining Evidence, and is finding himself more and more of a skeptic of some of the things he believed and advocated for before, and that one of my pieces of advice to him was take your time. There's no rush, right? Like, just don't loosen your grip a little bit and take it in, and don't be concerned about labels, right? Like, don't worry about labeling yourself, or having to have the right answer right now. Just and that's something that at the time. I think I did a little bit, but I wish I didn't do it enough. It became, we talked about this a little bit, is that your reasons for leaving are probably crap, actually. Like, you're unpersuaded, but it doesn't mean that you have a good counter that you've latched onto. It's not like often I think it's that we've been persuaded of what's not the case, but it's not because we've become persuaded of what is necessarily. It's that we're realizing that some of the things that we were holding onto are no longer are not good reasons, and we're finding better reasons for other things. But that process takes a long time to kind of vet out, and my views are changing all the time, right? I have reasons why I'm not a Christian, and those haven't changed in a long time. But the reasons I'm other things, those have swapped in and out a little bit. And I think that when we've talked, I think we mentioned this earlier, is that there's a tendency to look back and project from your current viewpoint back on to your deconversion, or at least I know I do that, and I've talked to other people who have done that, is that, oh, these are the reasons why I deconverted, and maybe you tell it in a way where you're recalling from your current vantage point what your reasons must have been, but they probably weren't that they probably weren't as well articulated back then, and probably not as solid. So
yeah. I mean, so you're right. I think part of the process is realizing how much fallibilism comes out of the woodwork when you move away from a religious faith, that it's okay to not label yourself. It's okay to not have the answers. And then I think, at least for me, I've started to realize like it's an ever-changing enterprise. It's to me not one that I necessarily even want to say, I am damn right about this issue. I'm right about that issue. I don't even look, I try not to even look at it that way anymore. I mean, there are some things I think I'm right about. There are some things I'm a little shaky on. I could be wrong. And there are some things I'm probably like, fuck, I don't know. I'm probably dead wrong on this. But I think that the shift is that from I got to be on the side of truth with a capital T, no matter what, versus a more fallibilistic approach to these sorts of things, which says it's okay to like change your views very frequently about a number of different things. That itself goes back to the conversation we had about being stressed versus relaxed in your deconversion. Part of the relaxing part is embracing very new interpretations that you may be very sophomoric in, only to trade them out later for other interpretations and other beliefs. And I think that's, I mean, I don't know, that's kind of fun to me, for lack of a better term. I mean, that's kind of fun. And it's okay to not be able to like articulate the best kind of reasoning for why you find yourself where you are at the moment when you initially deconvert. I think that's completely legitimate. You're dead on.
Yeah, I think as well, this making content has been a really interesting experience, because for myself, I know that I'm wrong in some of the things I'm putting out. I know that I'm going to regret them. They're the best, best guess at the time. But I found it really valuable now to, I think I'd argue, well, I think I'm definitely more able to be wrong now about things. I think there's a certain, oh, you know what it is? There's a certain cost to being wrong as a Christian. The way the stakes are so high that you can't allow yourself to be wrong about certain things. And so it becomes kind of belief formation under pressure, or adherence under pressure.
Yeah.
And I wanted to cite, Ozzy had mentioned in the chat, he said, apologetics is philosophy on a leash. And I thought that was fantastic. And it's so funny how when you go back afterward, or I did anyway, I went back afterward, and as I'm retaking in certain philosophical illuminations or things that I'm reading that I had discounted before, I'm like, wait, that was there that whole time, right? Like all of a sudden you have this whole different perspective because you are, like you said, you're projecting your argument onto it and picking out the things that you're reading it through this filter. It's just really interesting. So
yeah, there's only a certain level of plasticity to when you're doing apologetics. You can only go so far, and then there's that moment where you're like, well, I better come back. Water's getting a little deep out here. I'm gonna come back.
Can you talk a little bit? I don't know how comfortable you are talking about your wife in terms of her own journey and how that interacted with yours, or I have no clue where she's at or where she was or whatever, but what that process was for you.
Yeah. So I gotta be a little careful just because she's not as public about it as I am. But
Sure.
when I told her, I was surprised to know that, you know, something like, she wasn't surprised, which kind of blew me away for one. She wasn't shocked, but I think I think she sort of knew something like that was coming. I didn't. I mean, I thought when I sit down and talk with her, like, this is divorce. Like, that's what I swear to God, I thought this is it. But she had basically told me that there's things that she was going through that were, let's just say, comparable, that we were just hiding from each other. Like, here I am making videos on YouTube, and I, towards the very tail end, having reservations and doubts. Being an apologist, I got like 15K subs, right? And I'm doing the apologist thing, the Christian thing, and I'm doubting, right? And I come to her and I tell her, and I'm thinking, this is it. Like, your husband, the one who, like, for a lot of time ignored you to go do videos, like, who putting God first, right? Like, so much shit can go into putting God first that it can take a strain on your marriage. So we were already having kind of issues at the time. And when I told her, I thought, like, this is the final nail in the coffin. It turns out that, like, her response sort of blew me out of the water. It was just kind of, I did not expect it at all. And so we ended up having, like, I mean, we talked all night about our beliefs and why we were sort of, like, quiet about it. And it was, we each had very different reasons for it. So I basically came to find out that she was going through a process of her own and re-examining her own faith. And we actually, like, for the first time had, like, a real, I mean, that conversation meant more to me than the day I said I do when I married her. I mean that sincerely. Like, as much thought and power and love that I put into that day, it paled into dismal insignificance in light of, like, the honesty and openness of both of us coming together and being that, like, raw with each other. So my wife, I mean, I can tell you she's a theist. I would not classify myself as a theist, so there is a divide between us. But yeah, she's had her own experience, and it in small ways mimicked mine, but in different way, very different ways too. But yeah, so she didn't go, "Oh, you're an atheist? Like, that sucks, because now I have, like, a biblical reason to divorce you, loser." Like, she didn't do that, so that was good. That was good.
Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't mentioned this, but my wife can. She and I obviously had been in a lot of the same engagements with people and through a lot of the same things. So it wasn't, she wasn't starting, like, I think she had already started that, some of that process, and was in that mind frame where she could be open to it. She hadn't gone as far as I had, not close. And she was basically like, let's see this. Let me see where this takes me. Let me look into it. And I tried to stay hands off. Actually, I did not want to. I did not want to have someone who, like, my wife's not that way anyway. She's her,
Sure.
She's going to believe what she believes, and come to her own conclusions about it. And we disagree on things. It's not like that. But that was definitely, those conversations after that were rich and wonderful and very honest and frank. And that's a really sweet thing to have. One thing I do take from I had a very interesting church that I was involved in. And one of the aspects was a full accountability, to the point where my wife, I had written a testimony with her about my prior life and everything I had done. So she knew every dirty secret about me. She knew everything that I'd ever done. So my wife and I have always had an extremely honest relationship. But that moment, actually going through those months of not telling her, was probably by far the biggest thing I'd never told her about. And it wasn't that I didn't plan on telling her; it's that I was out of fear. I wanted to see where it was going to go. I wanted to see where it was going to go first. I didn't want to cause premature, have her to worry prematurely about it. And then as you're getting deeper and deeper, you're like, this is going to be it's not going to be a small thing, right?
Some wine.
It just gets, but those conversations were very, very rich, and it did give me a totally different perspective on her. Now, recently, we were having a conversation about having kids, and because I had my 3 kids, like, bang, 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 right? Like, a year and a half between the 3 of them. and we had 4 pregnancies in those 3 years.
Wow.
So I was a fairly active dude, but
that is quite literally bang, bang, bang. That is, yeah.
Bang, 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 bang.
Yeah.
And that was it. We only did it those 4 times. She's like, get off of me. But I think some of that came actually, I think we were trusting God for that stuff. I'm trying to remember it. And I asked my wife, I said, how did that happen? Like, I'm trying to recall what my mindset was. And she said, she believes it was about that. It was about not using condoms and letting God just decide when that was going to happen. And it's funny how that happens, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, there you go. That goes in there.
Be more kids. That's what I've noticed.
And the funny thing is that, well, not the funny thing. The thing that crushes me is I said, well, why didn't you speak up? And she said, I was being submissive to my husband.
Yep.
And that crushed me. I mean, my God, like I don't know the things that she didn't say to me all those years of, that because she was assuming we didn't have this, I wasn't like, beating her.
No, I know exactly what you mean. I know, but she was kind of assuming her role. I mean, that's a really good way to put it. You got to be a submissive wife.
It probably played out even in terms of passively, in terms of her just not raising issues or just being in a mindset of, oh, that's the direction we're going or whatever, right? And she's a determined woman and has her own. She's not passive in that way, but I suspect in being dutiful to her beliefs, she was doing some of that, and we weren't having conversations about that stuff that we should have been. So it's interesting.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's heavy. That's heavy. I mean, it certainly helps. It's really odd when you. I mean, it's. I've talked to my wife about this. That it's a really strange thing that when you remove God from the equation and things get better. It's almost like see, I was right. Damn it! Like it's really odd. I mean, I've noticed other things too. Since my deconversion, I've relied much less on things like prayer completely less, I guess I should say, relying on prayer for things that so I guess the way I'm trying to put this is I would typically ask God for help or guidance for or pray for are now things where this one aspect of my OCD aspect of my personality comes through now. And I work really hard at that thing and I don't rely on praying for it as much. And my life has gotten better for that in a number of ways. A good way is professionally. So, there was a time in my life where I was like, okay, God, like I got to know your plan, what you want. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? This is not the job I want to do. This is not what I went to school for. And when I lost God, I just said, fuck it. I know what I want. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do everything I can to attain that goal. And I did, and I got it. And like our life has been better in a number of different ways because of that. And I seriously think that it was the removal of that. I hate to be like the skateboard atheist, but like that crutch, that religious crutch, it really, really was. It was a significant crutch for me where I handed over part of the work that I should probably be doing on my own to God, thinking, God, like, I need to know your will. Help me with this. Show me the way. I'm gonna sit in humble obedience and pray. And removing that put the onus on me, put the burden on me to work all the more harder in obtaining things on my own. And that has been reflected vocationally in my life and in other ways. So I think that's interesting.
There's along those lines there, I think that the having that narrative at play, that you're late to a meeting so that this could happen, or oh wow, if this hadn't happened and this and these things that I was upset about hadn't happened, this wouldn't have happened, right? This kind of replaying back through of the story of your life and finding the causes and associating the agent behind them. That probably at the time, and I'm trying to remember how I would have taken it, but I think at the time I would have been disappointed in things not occurring, but waiting in store to see what's in store as a result. Okay, kind of a reset. I'm disappointed about that, but obviously that didn't happen for a reason. And when you're an atheist and you don't believe in the narrative, you realize that life goes on, and good things happen and bad things happen, and you get up when opportunities go away. It means that there is going to be an opportunity you wouldn't have had those opportunities happened, and that is kind of just the way the world works, you know.
The stress of asking why God, why is removed, right? Like, why did this happen? You're a loving God. I've prayed for this thing, this shiny new thing. It didn't happen. Why? And all of the stress and the confusion and all of that is a part of Christian belief, at least in evangelical Christian belief that I adhere to. So removing that removes that stress. It removes that crutch. It puts more of an emphasis on your own resource, like using all of your resources to obtain whatever it is that you need to obtain, and not relying on, you know, the infinite God of the universe to give you his reasoning for why he held it from you, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I'm gonna send out a link here, but the along those lines, the I wanted to go back. One thing that I talked about was kind of habits of mind, and that took that narrative and the cause, finding the what was at work, or that reading into events being a certain way. That habit of mine stuck with me for a couple of years, actually. Probably for really the first 6 months, where I no longer believed in God, but I would still have that narration going on or that this is happening, so that this, you know, why, or my querying, why is this happening? And I remember there were a couple of occasions where I kind of like shook my head and was like, wait, I don't believe this anymore. Why am I still running through this filter? And I think that was one of the things I heard in the Therefore God first episode, that I heard you mention out things like that, and I was like, oh yeah, that's true. That happens for me as well. Do you still have those experiences?
Less and less. I mean, I'm not an old man Bert with my deconversion, but even at 3 years, I mean, prayer, right? Early on, you're finding yourself praying when you're like, wait a minute, why am I doing this? Like, that's happened to me. I was on a flight where that happened, and I was like, all right, God, like, get me through this. And I'm like, wait a minute. Oh yeah, there's like nothing there. What am I doing? Like, I literally had that go through my head, which was kind of weird. Turning the other cheek is the other thing. There'd be times where I rarely get into conflicts with people, but I've had instances like shortly after my deconversion where I had a conflict with somebody, and it's like, okay, you know, turn the other cheek, like that posture, that sort of mindset, that way of thinking, forgive them their trespasses, they know not what they do. That sort of Christian narrative became my go-to. And then I was like, wait a minute, like that's a part of who I used to be. So instead I just stabbed them. I was like, that's a joke. That's a joke. Please don't believe that. Don't believe that. But yeah, it's very easy to still get locked into those modes of thinking. I mean, dude, it's like your entire life, right? It's for lack of a better term, it's your worldview. It's the way you view everything else. So removing that, you're not just simply going to be able to just not retain components of it that are like central to you. I don't know. Nowadays, a lot of that's gone. I got to be honest. I've still had moments where 3 years, actually, I shouldn't even say that. I've still had moments where I found myself starting to pray and just stopping. They tend to be moments where I'm under an extreme amount of stress or something. I am a terrible flyer. I hate flying. Part of my job requires me to fly a little bit. So I'm a horrible flyer. And so when I get on a plane, there's been times where one of two things happens. I either immediately, like that thing starts going in my head where I start praying and I catch myself, or I just have like 5 vodkas and I'm good. So one of the two happens.
Yeah, I saw you sent out the drink picture.
Yeah, that was on purpose. That was on purpose.
Right? Like that's there was a time a couple of years ago, actually, where my son had a quite serious condition that I was worried about for his leg, and I got a dire call from my wife who was at the hospital, and she was in tears. And I had to jet over there in the middle of the night, and I'm driving, and I wagered, or not wagered, I was bargaining, or essentially like going, okay, well, if this is the case, you know, or whatever, right? And I'm like, wow, just betrayed everything that that I've come to believe.
Yeah.
And again, these are the things that I know when I bring them up, I'm going to get some flack for. I don't actually get flack, but if anybody ever wanted to give me flack, the old me would be looking at this, going, "Look, he just incriminated himself. Clearly, what was
flack
going
comes
on
at like
there,
1,000 subs.
was
1,000 sub, 500 to 1,000 is flack area, as far as I remember. Yeah.
Not at 43, not at 43 years old, but at
subs. Yeah. It's all related to subs, my friend.
Subs. I'm only well, I got some time to go then. Oh, how many do you have?
Yeah, right.
You're not at 15,000 anymore.
No, I'm not. Actually, I don't even know how many I have. I had to look, actually. I have no clue how many subs I have. I think I did that recent thing with, so most of my subs are pre-suppers. I don't know if you know this. Because I did like my real first, it's not even like I didn't mean it to be like a comeback to YouTube, but I just was like really angry with Apologia Studios, and so I wanted to make a response. And so now I have 186 subs, and probably 150 are presuppositional apologists. So all of my videos get like downvoted. They all like are filled with the most bearded Calvinist folks you could ever like see. It's ridiculous. So
if you post like a workout video or something like that,
I'm screwed. I'm screwed. Yeah. 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 On what basis? On what basis do you do deadlifts? That will be the comments. Like it'll just it'd be more awful. Awful.
How do you know that you're at 10 reps?
Yeah, that's right. That's it.
Helena, welcome. And do you want to say hi to Noah? Oh my gosh. So Helena, just so you know, Helena's a werewolf, and occasionally she'll transform while on camera.
I've seen that.
She actually has several. Oh, you have seen it. Okay, I don't have to explain it then. And I think other. Okay, so in terms of your interaction with Jeff Durbin and the James White taking up the challenge, the interesting thing I found with that, and actually I engaged a couple of my pre-sup friends who I've been friends with since college on Facebook, and they were really at least one of them was really had real trouble with the fact that you didn't identify your belief or your position.
A lot of pre-subs got mad at that, I noticed.
Yeah, I found that really really curious. It's a little bit of don't preach to us. What sorry, I'm trying to manage.
No, you're good.
There we go.
No, the reason I didn't just flat out come out and say, I was a deconverted Christian, so I just didn't think it was relevant. I personally didn't. I mean, I mentioned this in my video back and forth to them that my beliefs. I'm going to offer you a criticism. I'm going to offer you. That's really all my video was at that point. I didn't necessarily intend to offer them anything like my own sort of argument. Oh, well, I kind of did. I take that back. I mean, I kind of did. But I just didn't think it was relevant. I said, here's why I think. I literally started my videos with, here's why I think what you're saying is wrong. And it was a limitation to me of their apologetic approach to first have to know what my beliefs are in order to give something like a response to me. I sort of figured that once they knew that they sort of figured I was an atheist, I already knew what their responses would be, right? Like, who are you to say? You have no basis to stand. But I wanted to sort of highlight that to me, and I made this same argument when I was an evidential apologist, that to me it's an indictment of one's apologetic system if you need to know the ins and outs of someone's worldview before you respond to them. Because it puts the focus away from the arguments, it puts the focus away from something like an appropriate kind of discourse to me, and on to other things that I think are entirely irrelevant. Now they may think they're relevant, and that's where that beef kind of happened. But yeah, that was I don't know. I kind of think that was a mistake making those responses. Looking back on it, I had expected a lot more, especially from James White when he made his video.
Yeah, they spent a lot of time talking about things I didn't think were terribly relevant to your points. So. Sorry, go ahead.
They spent a lot of time talking about you know, what was your background, or what did you believe right now?
Yeah.
As if it made any difference, and to me, it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I'm wondering
right.
why, you know, why does it seem to them that it does make a difference? Can you remember?
Yeah, I mean, I think to them it may have been like, we need to know whether you have a leg to stand on, right? Because I think to them, if I'm a Christian to them, then I have a justification for reason and logic and what have you. If I'm not a Christian, if I'm an atheist, if I'm one of those horrible people, then I don't have a basis for reason and logic, and so their response to me is going to be different. But I mean, I sort of knew that was going to kind of be the response. So it's almost like I was, yeah. I mean, I hate to say like setting a trap. That sounds so bad. But I just didn't want to have that conversation, quite frankly. And I mentioned in my video to them that I just don't like telling my deconversion stuff to precepts. Like it feels so odd and awkward. I feel like dirty doing it. They don't care. They don't really, like, my experiences don't matter to them really at all, at least in my experience with dealing with precepts. You know,
it becomes that challenge though of like, well, what is it you believe? Is, well, number one, it's an easy ad hom, right? It's an easy way to just kind of vitiate or fallaciously vitiate a person's entire perspective on it. But as well, they have there's a line of argumentation which goes, and they didn't quite do this there, but there's certainly a line of you don't exactly, you're going to have to borrow from my worldview, so why should I even be presenting a case to you when you don't accept the justification for the required justification for your own position that you'd like it to articulate back to me. So that becomes the easy shift for them, where there's once you come to the point of challenging their foundation, well, you lack a foundation, so why should I even? There's, you know, the worst ones will say, why should I even bother explaining to you what my foundation is, since you can't know it, so, or you can't ground your knowledge, so.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
Ozzy, are you there? I don't know if he's having tech issues still.
No, I'm
okay,
here.
good,
For some reason, my mic and camera weren't working. I had to reboot. Sorry about that. Noah, hello. It's very, very nice to meet you, actually.
It's very nice to meet you too. Now that I've unblocked you.
Yeah. What the heck?
Bert told me.
Had you really blocked him?
He's the only person, and it was an accident. I meant to add him, and I just must have done it fast. And I blocked him, and Bert sent me a message saying, "Can you?" It was like the nicest message ever. It was like, hey, so like, can you unblock Ozzy? And I was like, what? So I went and it took me like an hour to figure out how the hell to even find my block list. I mean, I don't ever block anybody, and it literally just had his name right there, said Ozzy blocked, and I was like, oh my god, now this is a horrible introduction. Like, I'm a fan of his videos, and now I have to tell him I blocked him. This is great.
It's a feature of Google Plus now. Every new Google Plus account, automatically I'm blocked, you know, so that no one has to deal with me. So anyway, well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to talk to you, because before I started making YouTube videos, there were a few people that I always wanted to respond to. I would see their videos, and they would make. I'm thinking specifically of apologists who would make video challenges to atheists, saying, you know, answer me these 5 questions. And you were one of those people. And I wanted to make videos to respond to some of those challenges, because I was often dissatisfied with the responses that you were getting. I thought, oh, geez, that's not a very good response, and you know, he's gonna tie that person into pretzels, right? Because you were quite capable, and I thought, oh, you know, I'd really like to have a crack at some of these. But I was such a techno peasant, I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to create a YouTube account. I didn't know how to upload videos. I thought it was going to be, you know, incredibly difficult, and so I never got around to it. But I always wanted to, and I was always gratified. And I would see people like Sisyphus Redeemed and Theoretical Bullshit and people like that sort of weighing in with video responses. And so anyway, it's a real pleasure to finally talk to you, actually.
Well, thank you. Likewise, I really appreciate that. I've watched your videos for maybe 9 months, almost a year. So I've seen some of your videos. I'm still like a YouTube watcher. I mean, I still watch videos. I tend not to interact that much. I do have, like, I think I said, a private Facebook group. I should probably add you guys to it, where I do hangouts with Garrett, Sisyphus Redeemed. We're doing one in 3 weeks about Sam Harris's new book about Islam. So, like, we have things going on all the time. I just tend not to make them public. We keep it private. But
is this
cool.
the book with Majid Nawaz? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, I just finished rereading that not long ago. So yeah.
Yeah, you should definitely join. I'll add you guys after this. But
Perfect.
yeah, I mean, I'm still interacting, still there. I just I've kind of moved on from the YouTube world. But yeah, man, that's a shame. I really would have liked to. There's a certain point where I had so many responses. You know what I mean? Like I'd wake up the next day and I'd make one video, right? And I wake up the next day and I have 15 responses. I make a video that day, wake up the next day, I have 20 new responses. So it became a point where I had to like pick and choose. Yeah. And like who I was going to respond to, and then like I'd get like 10 responses to that response. It was like virus. It was like bacteria like replicating everywhere. But yeah, that would have been awesome back in the day to have an Aussie response. That would have been cool. I would have been honored.
Oh. I didn't have a channel then. We wouldn't have been honored. You would have gotten some really inept, crappy video with lousy sound.
Webcams like backwards, like your eye, like you're looking in it, like those old folks, like the viral video of the old folks. Like, is it working? Like that's what you would be doing. That's awful.
Right. That's awful. What you would have got. I had a question for you about that though. Like, what like you've probably answered this question before, but what moved you or prompted you to become an online apologist, to defend your faith publicly? Because I think that's a different kind of animal, and I'm curious what moved you to do that, right? Because it takes a certain amount of pluck to do it. Yeah,
actually, I can't think the last time anyone's ever asked me that, to be honest with you. Why did I? I'm trying to think of why I did. I think I saw a couple YouTube videos that just were very, very like from atheists who were very smug and sure of themselves and offered really, really shitty arguments in favor of their perspective, whatever it was, whether it was just a number of different reasons. And so I remember one person, God, what was his name? Who did I make my first response to? I always remember his name because it's really kind of a weird one. I forget it now. Whatever.
You're getting up there in age.
Yeah, I am. I'm 33. I can't even imagine what life will be like when I'm 43. Woo! Yeah, no, I just remember like going, that's an awful like response, and everyone is agreeing with it and liking it, and I feel like I want to say something because I just don't think that's true or well reasoned or well thought at, and I maybe there's a sense in which I probably didn't know at the time. The monster that I was like jumping into of YouTube, especially back then, because that's when like the blasphemy challenge happened right around then, and that's when like YouTube atheism was going nuts, and so I mean I got my sub base very fast.
Can you review what the blasphemy challenge was, and what time period are we talking about? Because I feel like I've been here a long time, but I must have missed that one.
The blasphemy challenge was like what? 05 maybe? 05, 06? Before that maybe?
Oh my God! I didn't even know there was a YouTube back then.
Yeah,
it was early days of YouTube for sure.
Yeah, it was super ghetto YouTube back then. The interface was crazy different. But yeah, basically people would get on their camera and they would deny the Holy Spirit. You know that verse in the Bible that says, basically there's an interpretation that says if you deny the Holy Spirit, that's the unforgivable, unpardonable sin. That if you say, you know, I renounce the Holy Spirit, you're done, right? That's an interpretation that a lot of people take seriously, and so people would it was like a challenge to get on your webcam and say on cam that you renounce the Holy Spirit, and it became kind of a movement, like a thing, and a lot of people were doing it, and then it became kind of like a culture, like an atheist YouTube sort of culture early on around then. So that's what that was.
I almost made a video about that. That was one of the things that I wanted to make a video about because I thought that was sort of a bad interpretation of that passage that
of course
construes it. And I thought, no, we're spinning our wheels and we're looking kind of we atheists, team atheists, we look kind of ridiculous to most knowledgeable Christians, right? This was a bad move. Although I agreed with the spirit. I thought it was sort of a good.
Sure.
It's a way to come out and show, look, I'm not afraid of what your badass God is going to do to me because I'm that incredulous. I'm just, the threats are just not a concern, right? So I thought it was well motivated, but I just thought the particulars were wrong, and I thought that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the spirit of kind of emphasizing autonomy, right, and sort of destroying this like what's seen as like this very large component of Christian theology, right? This canon. It's a way of basically destroying a canon and saying, look, I'm above this. I don't think it's true. I think it's bullshit. and it was a way of doing it publicly so everyone could see it. I think that part of it, that sort of autonomy aspect of it, was good. But yeah, I could have probably picked a different verse. That would have helped a little, just a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, I have a raft of questions for you, but I obviously don't want to dominate here. But can I ask one or two more, maybe?
Yeah, go for it. I'm not going anywhere.
Yes.
Okay. Well, how have you benefited from Christianity? Because to my mind, I mean, I was a Christian. I tumbled out of my faith when I was an adolescent, so it was a long, long time ago for me, and
okay.
A lot of formations happened since then, of course. But you were more mature and more mature in your faith. I had a very fundamentalist, brittle faith, and but I think you had a more mature faith, and you were more into apologetics, and I was not. So I mean, I think your faith meant more to you than mine did to me, and I imagine that's sort of left a stamp on your personality and your character and your outlook on life. And now that you don't believe in that, though, is there anything that you're grateful about having grown up with that faith or been so seriously committed to that set of doctrines? Is there anything that you sort of carried forth that that you're better for having been a Christian?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there is. So I think Christianity carried me through a period in my life where I needed to say no to a lot of vices. My background was I had really shitty parents, and there's a lot of drug and alcohol problems, and I really clung to those verses that focused on not drinking too much. I basically didn't touch alcohol till I deconverted. So a lot of the vices I maybe would have been more prone to give into, I simply abstained from, and I think in a larger context, it just made me a little more conservative in a lot of different ways. It made me more conservative in the sorts of folks I hung out with. I'm thankful for that. Like, there was a lot of destructive roads I think I probably could have gone down, given the way I was raised, and Christianity gave me a way of not doing that. So in that sense, I'm very thankful to it, even though I now think it was a false belief, a false set of beliefs. So I'm thankful for that, and so I guess in some sense, it gave me some of my personality characteristics, being less prone to party and go out and drink too much, and there's a sense in which I'm still kind of learning to do that the right way now. One of my new things is, it's not really a new thing, it's not like a habit, let me throw that out there, but like drinking and writing. Like, I like to occasionally have a drink and like actually write out my thoughts, and it's kind of like a Bukowskian sort of thing, and I'm digging it. And I don't do it very often, but it's kind of cool. So that's something I never would have even thought of doing or even engaging in when I was a Christian. So, but I am at the same time very thankful that I had a locking mechanism in place to keep me within some set of confines. You know what I mean? So I'm thankful for that. Man, I'd be hard-pressed to think of much more, to be honest with you. It's not that Christianity gave me a lot of... It's not that I'm resentful for Christianity. I'm thankful for the fact that it got me to where I am today and allowed me to have the sort of life I have today. It allowed me to make the sort of friends that I have today. But I think if I could sort of say which side I'm more on right now, I'd probably be on the side of I kind of did me more harm than it did help, but what the things that it did help me with, I think were extremely important. I mean, honestly, I probably don't even know where I'd be. Honestly, I have no idea who I would be as a person, and if I would even be here, if I would even be alive, if I didn't have that story of Jesus who suffered so that we could live forever, so that my sufferings that I went through when I was living in a really shitty environment allowed me to connect with that and go, I'm going to be okay because God did this thing for me, right? Does that make sense? Like, when you're in that system, you're able to take some of the hardest, shittiest, most brutal circumstances and tie it to this larger story, and it makes certain things passable, like okay. It doesn't make them easy, but it makes them manageable. At least it did to me. And so I'm very thankful for that. I'd probably have to think a bit more, Ozzy, to be honest with you, to give you much more than that, but that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay, I like that answer, actually. I mean, my own experience was very, very different. I was very fortunate with my parents and stuff like that, so Christianity for me was never that kind of a crutch. It wasn't something that allowed me to bear things that would otherwise have been unbearable because I didn't have that kind of unfortunate upbringing, although there was some ugliness in my own upbringing. But certainly the things that you described about abstaining from certain vices, that was actually hugely influential, and I've taken that with me my whole life. The idea of moderation, the idea of temperance, of having a temperate character, of cultivating the virtue of self-possession, right? I think I got from that, and in my case, because I kind of had a quasi-Jehovah's Witness upbringing, the idea of not being too worldly, of not being materialistic, in fact, of being anti-materialistic, that has stayed with me. So things like that. I was wondering if you had anything like that. Like, are you a materialistic person? Would you, are you a non-materialistic person? And it's not a value judgment here. I'm just curious. Like, a lot of people who are very, very devoutly Christian sort of repudiate commercialism and materialism and stuff like that. Was that ever a variable in your life or not? Or is it?
I mean, not really. I've never. It's a really good question. I don't think so. I've always sort of lived within my means. I've never really. That's kind of stayed through Christianity and non-Christianity, to be honest with you. Maybe that's more of a fundamental component of my personality. I really don't know, but I don't consider myself to be a materialist. I feel like I should say that and then like turn my webcam around and show you like my mansion and my tigers with like gold leashes. Be like, I'm not a materialist. Come on, Ozzy. Right. No, I mean, I don't necessarily think Christianity had too much to do with that. I actually think that in some sense Christianity may have had some harm in that way. So let me kind of explain. When I started. So after I deconverted, I really started to pick up on Nietzsche, and I started to realize certain concepts that were very obvious to me in my faith and to the faith of those around me that I never noticed before Nietzsche. So a good example would be something like a basic conception of slave morality, right? Nietzsche's concept of slave morality is sort of reactive sense of morality where like the inability to obtain something becomes a virtue, right? And then it becomes systematized and diffused throughout a religion, right? So I can't get that thing, but like I don't need it because I have God, and you can have that, and I'm the virtuous person, right? You slap me, I'm not going to slap you back because I'm going to give you my other cheek, right? And it's a kind of deferred vengeance, because later on, at least on the evangelical, approach to things, like God kind of destroys the world, right? Like for now, it's going to turn the other cheek, love your neighbor, love all of this stuff, and then at the end, it's like I heard someone say that Revelation is like a Clive Barker movie, right? It's like because God's later going to destroy everything, so it's this very reactive, like way of getting what you want later, and having it be a virtue that you don't have it now. So in that sense, in terms of that, I think that materialism is certainly. Or at least not being a materialist and that being your virtue certainly is somewhere in there with Christianity, where a person says, I don't need that thing. I don't need that thing because streets of gold are waiting for me in heaven, right? I can live in. But look at Jesus. Jesus was the King of the universe, and he came down in where did he land? He didn't land in a castle. He landed in a manger, right? And so there's this kind of who's at the least of the table will eventually be at the best seat, right? I totally butchered that. The line is way better than that, right? But Nietzsche has the line, so the Bible says that whose last will be first, and Nietzsche says that whose last wishes to be first, and that stuck with me in a way that is hard to describe. Like once you realize that, you start to introspect and apply that, holy shit. I mean, I saw that all over my life. I saw that in the way I looked at people, in the way I reacted to those I had conflict with. I saw it in my family. I hate to go off on a tangent on this, but let me give you like a great example. I remember the night that this dawned on me, where I was reading this, and it felt like this is what Christians do. Like this is so what Christians do. I remember I was eating dinner with my grandfather. My grandfather's a theologian, author, knows the Bible in and out. He did this great prayer, like it was a really good prayer for dinner. Thank you, God, for all of this. We're humbled. We love you. Like very humbling, wonderful prayer. And then in the course of the dinner, he starts talking to me about eschatology and says, you know, Noah, I can't wait till we get to heaven and are able to see the great white throne judgment, to see those who are going to be judged. I can't wait to see the guy who stole my 76 Firebird. He actually said that to me. And I was just sitting there like, I was like, wow. I got to read more Nietzsche. That was like, it was so weird to me to hear that. And once you see that, you sort of become very skeptical. I mean, Nietzsche made me so freaking skeptical of the Christian love claims and truth claims, and I'm just kind of, I don't know, that sort of evangelical, like, I have lots of gay friends, I have lots of black friends, like that is when I hear that. Yeah, exactly.
I mentioned a couple of times in the past that back when the Charlie Hebdo occasion occurred, and I had a lot of Christian friends who were up in arms about us, the Muslims taking the lives of these Charlie Hebdo individuals. And I found it ironic because the individuals at Charlie Hebdo were not Christians. So they were butchered by Muslims, and then they died, and according to Christian theology, would be butchered by their God. But they were outraged at the Muslims over this, and you're like, it was deferred in one case and wasn't in another. Like, carried out by you're angry that they got to him first. Like, it's just really bizarre.
So I mean that's so. Like I think that has something to do, Ozzy, with materialism. Going back to your original question, I mean I feel like that's something that I realized is certainly present within. I mean, I don't think it happened to me as much. I mean, maybe it did, and I'm just completely not cognizant of it. But I wouldn't say to you, I don't think I necessarily was more or less materialistic pre-deconversion or post-deconversion. I don't know.
Okay, thanks. I've got like a ton of questions, so I'm just going to back off for a while.
Somebody else go for it, Deirdre.
I have a little bit of question. You fancied yourself as an apologist on YouTube back in the days, right? And a lot of people do here, and I've noticed that, I hate to say it, there's a lot of Rambo Christians. They're just like, Christianity on the internets, but I live in a basement. or they're like, it's the end of the world, and I'm in a bunker, and don't trust anybody, don't trust a church, don't trust a fellow Christian, everybody's fake, everyone except for me. And there's other people that are like, I'm a, you'll see it like a clone R.C. Sproul or a clone William Lane Craig, things like that. My question is, outside of the YouTube, what was your Christian life like?
Oh, wow. Well, I will start by saying in some sense, I kind of was a clone William Lane Craig. I mean, I used a lot of his arguments. I defended them in a way that I thought was sufficient, and I'd have my own conversations with people, but I did in a large way use a lot of his arguments because I thought they were persuasive. I thought they were very persuasive. But outside of, I mean, there was a real gap. I'll be honest with you. As much as when you make videos on YouTube and you have that high of a subscriber base and you're making content like this, there's a sense in which you're masking other parts of your life. Like they only see one side of you, and when you make videos that much and you're doing them on the topic of Christianity and they're all somewhat cerebral and intellectual, I guess, if that's what you want to call my videos. Like when that's all people see, they think that's your Christianity, right? For me, that side of my Christianity became bigger towards the end, but honestly, like I went to church, sang evangelical songs, went to Bible studies, I taught Bible studies. I did what I thought was everything the right way. I waited till I abstained from sex till marriage. Both my wife and I did. We did that the right way. I mean, I considered myself a very dedicated Christian. I read the Bible every day. First thing I did when I woke up is I prayed. I had this little thing where, like, before my feet hit the ground for the day, I would start with a prayer, like, do it the right way, right? So I guess I considered myself for a while a Baptist, and then I became non-denominational. I attended Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, which is very close to where I'm at now, with Chuck Smith before he passed.
No, Chucko.
Oh, yeah. So that was my church for a long time. But, yeah, it's kind of it's hard to answer that question. I mean, I guess I lived something like a normal evangelical Christian life, but I had this kind of like side business. I hate to call it a side business, but it was like a side life. And it was kind of odd because I'd have days where, like, this is going to sound so weird and neurotic, but I have days where I'd go to church and someone would say, oh, you're Veritas. Like, I know you. And I had to, like, go, okay, pride, like, stop. like I'm doing the Christian thing, right? Like pride. I mean, I wanted to go, damn right I am, turn my hat backwards, like, so I mean, like I had these very different spheres of my Christian life. One that was entirely cerebral, and one that was, thug life. Exactly. I was thug life. And then another that was just incredibly, what I thought was deep and spiritual, and both of those things sort of collapsed in on me at the same time. And when that happens, you kind of got no place to go but forward. But yeah, I mean, I hope that answers your question. I guess I'll just say I sort of lived a normal. I wasn't the bunker Christian. I wasn't the crazy, like, give me all your money Christian. I wasn't, like 99% normal, but then like I have this weird thing where like I eat kids or something. You know what I mean? Like there's a whole different types of Christians out there. There's the ones that seem completely normal and they have this really weird belief, right? I don't know. I hope that answers your question.
No,
I feel the more I'm
does.
talking, the more less normal I feel, actually.
But my question is, okay, so you came from, I'm just curious, just because I'm curious to be curious.
Sure.
I was once a Baptist too, from like, I don't know, 6th grade to like 22, right? And I've had a lot of flavors of Christianity, so I totally know what Calvary Chapel's like. I'm in San Diego, so like I've attended Horizon, which is an offshoot of Calvary, Maranatha. They're all offshoots, right? The Rock here is another offshoot. They all come from Calvary. That's really their roots. So I understand what those are like. But I'm just kind of curious, were you a Calvinist or an Arminian? Because most of the Calvary people are Arminians. I was just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, I was an Arminian for a long time, and then I eventually became a Molinist. I could never find myself being a Calvinist. I didn't think
William Lane Craig.
William Lane Craig's influence, but it was. I felt it was a good way to sort of. It's a good way to fix what I saw at the time as a problem between the two of those different perspectives. I could never be a Calvinist. I just felt like that wasn't biblical. It didn't make sense. It had a whole bunch of other philosophical problems if I accepted Calvinism. So, but I would say honestly, for the most of my Christian life, I was an Armenian. To be honest with you, I probably spent more time formulating defenses for a kind of Western monotheistic generic God than I did really getting into the depths of all of the different components of my theology. I'll be completely frank with you. I mean, I understood the different schools of thought and various different disagreements in Christianity, but it wasn't really super interesting to me. I know that sounds weird. The more interesting thing to me was God's existence, and that's where I spent most of my time reading, most of my time kind of learning. I just never really had any big in-house fights on those sorts of topics. But yeah, it was really hard at Calvary Chapel, if you know that, going to Calvary. Calvary Chapel is not a very intellectually stimulating church. They actually are very anti-intellectual. They don't like you thinking too much at Calvary. So I had those kind of issues that I faced also.
They were a little controlling. Calvary comes from a weird social background too. I mean, they started sort of as the biker hippie church, surfer biker hippie church. Yeah. And then they kind of got really hardlined in some ways. It was really strange to kind of... I know about Calvary. So my mom, when she deconverted out of Catholicism, we did a lot of church hopping when I was young, and so I remember the flavors of churches. So yeah, and so then you would make these relationships and stuff. So I know the flavor of Calvary.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit last week or a week or two ago about maybe it was 2 weeks ago of the reasoning yourself right out of faith, right? Or thinking too hard about it. You see a lot of that. And again, ironically, you've proved their point. So you can't win.
Yeah, that's it. I had the precepts telling me the same thing, right? They use me as an example of evidential apologetics. Look what evidential apologetics does to you. Go precept. So I'm like their flag that they wave now.
Yeah. It's hard to look around when your head's buried in the sand, right? Hey, Uriah, did you have anything that you wanted to add before we kind of move on, or thoughts?
No. So not really on this issue.
Did you have another aspect you wanted to touch on?
So, no, I was going to touch on earlier the about kind of how I came on to the how I didn't have a sort of a like falling out. I just had like an intellectual epiphany as to why I doubted, but that's my own story, so I'll listen in on what's going on here.
Sure, well, I mean, well, you can certainly. I mean, it doesn't have to be all about me. Did you, while we're on that, are you saying it was like a purely intellectual thing? Is that what you mean? Like it was just there wasn't any component to it, or what do you mean?
Yeah, my first doubt was I was just thinking about I was actually thinking about Genesis 9:3 one day, where Jehovah said to Noah, you know, I give to you all the animals as food, even the green vegetation. Yeah. And then I thought to myself, well, there's a lot of poisonous stuff out there.
That's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that.
and he's supposed to have perfect justice. If I had said the same thing and had something poisonous in my fridge and someone died from that, I would be at least guilty of involuntary manslaughter. So if God's justice is more than that, more than what human justice is, wouldn't he also be at least guilty of that?
Yeah, that is a very interesting approach. I never would have thought of that. I never would have thought of that.
Just thinking on the fly here, I think my response would have been that it wouldn't have been. So this is where chemistry and physics with a young Earth creationist gets a little strange. Is that I would have said that pre-fall those plants wouldn't have been poisonous because it wouldn't have been poisoned to me. The chemical compound or whatever would have been the way it is. What's interesting about that is you end up with situations where you have an intelligent design for development of certain vitamins through exposure to the sun, which involves a breakdown of a molecular breakdown, which is also the same thing your DNA undergoes that causes cancer and other deformities. You have these intelligently designed procedures that leverage physics that are also conducive to death and other horrible things. And physics would have had to have been very selective about how it operated pre-fall on certain conditions. I never also understood the I don't want to go down this whole path necessarily, but things like the gag reflex and other things. It seems bizarre to me if there's a world without death that you have an intelligent designer essentially create creatures that will be able to operate in a world that does have death. So that whole notion kind of breaks down for me. Right.
But if he foreknew the fall and then he didn't put that in there too, then he'd be incompetent too, right? So either way, he's incompetent in your eyes. So you can't win there.
No, because death entered the world, right? So we're not prepared for death. We'd be in conditions that were foreign. We're not meant to exist outside of God's presence. So the slow decay was part of the plan, or was it wouldn't have been anticipated, or he shouldn't have designed, unless he knew that we were going to suffer these things, he wouldn't have designed us with these precautionary measures in place, right? I would have expected.
I guess if he's blind, he could have, but I don't think I'm following you.
Well, either he would have had to have known what was going to be the case, and he would have wanted us to live under certain circumstances, but eventually die. So he put in these preventative measures that enabled us to thrive in a world with death. Otherwise, a world without death, there's no conditions for me. There's nothing about me that requires survival. There's no functions he needs to provide for survival. Survival is there's no thing as survival. There's only existence. But in the case of sin, death would have entered the world. Why do I then have all this equipment that then prepares me for those conditions such that I can't choke on food? Well, there was no choking on food that would have killed you before. These mechanisms don't make any sense. So either he planned for it, and the conditions for the fall occurred, and these designs kicked in as being useful, or what I would have anticipated would have been that we would have been utterly not prepared for it and would have
died.
Design in a world without death doesn't. Design without a world without death that are survival things doesn't make any sense to me. I don't even understand how that's an incoherent concept. Why do I process oxygen and need air to breathe if
yeah, I was
if
going
I
to say,
can never
even
die?
the digestive, even digestion, like we have a digestive system and all of that, even that, right? But I mean, you went even farther with breathing.
Why the hell would they even eat fruit, right?
Yeah. Well, breathing doesn't kill anybody, right? But I mean, digestion, you have to break down organisms, right? Even if it's just plants, right? There has to be death in the world for you to have a digestive system, as we do. So it would appear that we were created with Plan B in mind.
Well,
right?
yeah,
Right?
but I mean, that doesn't really necessarily not make any sense if God knew everything anyway.
Yeah, but you wonder, like, it makes a hash of the idea of a Plan A and a Plan B, right? This was always the plan.
This was always the plan.
Right. There was no fall.
No,
Just bullshit. There was no fall.
I agree with that.
Right?
I really do, and I have a hard time understanding how you could see it any other way, given just something as simple as digestive systems.
Somebody get canned ham in here. That's the only way.
So we can digest him?
Yeah.
No, just as children.
Oh.
Were you there?
Were you there? All right, guys, enough historical science for now.
I had a question for Noah about his view of apologetics now, though. I mean,
okay.
I do too. I've got lots of questions just like that.
Helena, go ahead. I've already had my go, so yeah.
No, you go first, because right now I've got people running around the house, so I can't turn on the cam.
Okay. Well, overall, like, what is your view of apologetics? I mean, my view is, I think that it's intellectual veneer. It's supposed to create a veneer of intellectual respectability to what I think is ultimately faith-based dogmas. And it's not to say that there aren't respectable arguments and that people don't pursue it in earnestness. That it's not necessarily a dishonest pursuit from the standpoint of an individual that's practicing it. But I think that the entire undertaking is it's philosophy on a leash. It's circumscribed philosophy. It's philosophy done backwards. It's not a quest for answers. You start with the answers and you reverse engineer the arguments and evidence that you need to get to your conclusions. But I'm wondering, do you take that view? And what was your view of it at the time? If your view is that now?
Sure. My view of it now is exactly the way you've characterized it. I mean, it's hoop jumping 101, right? It's how can I jump through hoop after hoop after hoop is perfectly as possible. I mean, it's all varnish and no product. It is a way of, in a lot of ways, bastardizing good philosophy in order to make what at the root is really a theological point that pastors make at the pulpits every Sunday. I mean, that's what it comes down to. I think that it exists because there is this breed of, at least in the evangelical world, people who typically tend to be males. I'm not entirely sure why that's the case, but people who have a sort of want to keep their intellectual life central to them, and so they have to marry it to, in some instances, I mean, not in some instances, but in the case of Christianity, a very odd set of beliefs. They have to justify them in very odd ways, and so that's the hoop jumping I'm talking about. So to people who have a thought life and who really want to cultivate it, and they take their faith seriously as well, to marry those two things is apologetics. That's the way I look at it now. The way I looked at it back then was just, I was extremely ignorant of that being even a possibility. To me it was, oh look, there are these good reasons to believe that God exists and that Jesus rose from the dead. It's not just something you have to take by faith. It's this other tool to get people who are more intellectually minded, who have more of a cerebral thing going for them, that have a thought life and who read books and are eggheads. It's a way in to Christianity for those folks. That's how I saw it. I kind of saw it as that. It was also, I think, in given my theology, sort of mandated, right? Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. And to me, that was a signifier that, we have a thought life that is important to God, and that we cultivate it, and that's what apologetics was to me. It was a way of showing God His existence. It was almost like choir at church through like your brain. That's like the worst way I could describe it. It was kind of like, it was I was a choir director, and my choir and my art was arguing for God's existence and showing that there are good reasons to believe that there's something really there. And I thought at the time a lot of people need to hear that these days. I mean, I had this view of atheism and this view of secularism that saw it as just the most deflationary way possible, that like I want to help these poor atheists who live in this world devoid of meaning and value. And that sounds so depressing to you when you're a Christian. That sounds so awful and bad. And this, to me, was a way of helping people out of that. It was a way of using a tool, a theological tool, to bring them into the faith. So in a way, it was a kind of evangelism to me. Yeah. So now the way I look at it is very, very different. I mean, it's certainly still to me as a theological tool. I just think it's a theological tool that takes people to really false beliefs. So I don't think, if you follow apologetic lines of reasoning, right? If you go, here's an argument, and here's the best counter, and here's the best apologetic counter to that, and here's the best counter to that. If you go as far as you can down that line and string out every single argument you can, I personally believe that if you're intellectually honest, you're going to find Christianity wanting. And that's how I kind of look at apologetics now. I got to tell you, this is a little personal, but I'll go ahead and share it. I'm actually, if there is anything like an anger at Christianity, it came to me through what apologetics did with a relationship that I had with somebody in my personal life. So I had a really close friend at the time that I started to get into apologetics, and this person had previously had issues with depression and with drugs, and he was clean for a long time. And over time, this person became my best friend. His name was Mike, and I worked with him. And every day at work, we'd have like conversations about God and religion. And I think he was kind of he came from a Christian home, but just didn't find it interesting anymore. He'd living with his girlfriend, just didn't give a shit, right? Like it wasn't necessarily that he was an athist. He just was kind of like a nominalist. Didn't really, in name only, like occasionally went to church when she wanted to go to church, whatever. So we started having conversations, and it was kind of like my apologetic punching bag. I could like try it out on him and try out this argument, try out this. And so it eventually got to the point where I realized that he really started to think about these things. Like my interaction with him and my apologetics with him made him seriously contemplate large worldview level questions. And I don't think he was equipped to handle that kind of thing. And so I basically, long story short, my uncle came into work one day and told me that he died. He passed away. He actually died of a drug overdose. And he'd been off drugs for a long, long time, and I guess his first hit back, he did way too much, and he died. And to me, a large part of my deconversion was struggling with the fact that I did everything right. I did everything the way I thought I was supposed to do it theologically and evangelically. And it paradoxically came to a point where someone was so burdened by those thoughts and conversations. I mean, I never told me. I didn't feel like this was something. I wasn't getting that vibe. But I certainly look back on it, and I'm convinced that those conversations made him ponder questions that just led to his depression and eventually his wanting to remove himself from that. And that was the way he decided to do it. And so that I look back on that, and I'm it's hard to say I'm angry at apologetics or I'm angry at Christianity for that, but it's certainly something that I'm still, I mean, I guess I'll be honest, I still am kind of angry about it. It makes me feel like it was a tool that was supposed to do something good, and I think to some degree, I mean, obviously there's a bunch of other factors that come into this, but I think that certainly played a part, and insofar as it played a part, I'm somewhat resentful because of it.
Wow, that's quite a story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, like, you know, they say that, you know, the unexamined life is not worth living, you know, but you know, examining life, it's hard, and it's hard on people, and some people are not emotionally prepared for it, you know, and
yeah,
and I don't know, I think there are ways of approaching questions that can be, you know, a little bit dangerous and destabilizing. A person can lose one's equilibrium, and maybe that's what happened with your friend. And
yeah.
if you know, and if you know, apologetics is supposed to be this sort of this quasi-sacred thing, right, that mandated by God, you would think that, well, it's not going to have that kind of consequence, right? It should never lead to anything like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've just, that's all I've thought of. When March rolls around, that's all I'm thinking about. It's the anniversary, so I kind of go, it just pops into my head, and I start thinking about it. And I remember when I was going through the struggle of my deconversion, I said, what makes the most sense of that, right? Like, let's think about this. Like, what, you know, does that event make more sense in a world where there's a God characterized by the way that I believe he's characterized in the Bible, that wants me to evangelize in the way that I've done, or does it make more sense that there's like that's not true, right? that not necessarily that there's nothing up there, but certainly that the God that I believe in isn't really there. And I slowly started to find myself believing the latter, and that event played a big part in it. There was a church. Oh, God, I think it was close to Baylor. We were living in Southeast Texas a little while ago, and there was a church in Baylor or right around Baylor University, I think, where like a pastor was doing a baptism and had like electrical equipment, like mic and other electrical equipment, too close to the water, and before the person entered, some equipment fell in, and he died. He actually like was electrocuted in front of his entire congregation. And someone sent me that article, and that to me is like a similar sort of thing. It's so freaking like not the thing you would expect if there's a God with the purported properties that the Christian God has. Now, of course, right, the apologetic response is, you know, there's a plethora of factors that we're not privy to that God is, that come into play, and as long as that's possible, we can never really say with certainty that that's reason to believe there's no God. It just seems utterly insufficient for a number of different reasons. But that's kind of the same thing, and it was, the more I contemplate really odd, ironic, paradoxical, batshit crazy stories like that, the more I ask, like, what kind of world makes sense of that? You know, it certainly doesn't seem to be the Christian worldview. I hate using that word, but yeah.
You know, what I find interesting about this is when you and Bert were talking earlier, you were talking about sort of existential questions and stuff like that, and the role of existential concerns in your deconversion. And you know, it's funny how the question of God's existence gets played out in terms of formal arguments and apologetics and counter-apologetics and stuff like that. And yet the reasons why people convert and deconvert invariably seem to rest more on these existential questions and these things that happen in a person's life that nudge you in the direction of there being a God or a way. Like, that just doesn't seem to be consistent with my picture of reality, if the picture of reality includes a God, right? Or, yes, this just happened, and you know, this seems to be highly suggestive of a God, and it's usually these weird existential things, which when you state them explicitly, you try to put that in the form of an argument. You go, how in the world could that ever rationally lead you to think it's more likely that there's a God than not? But it's not. I mean, this is really pre-rational. It's really weird how this works. That was certainly true for me. There were all kinds of rational things that sort of, you know, shook my faith and stuff like that. But in a way, that there were these other things, these weird little things, little embarrassments that happened to me, and things that I felt deep down inside were misplaced guilt, where I tried to make myself feel guilty for things that, darn it, I can't really muster a genuine guilt for this, or, you know, or shame about this and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then there were things that I felt pride in that I knew that I shouldn't be feeling, you know, pride for and stuff like that. But it was weird existential things like that that did it, right? And then, yeah, it never ceases to amaze me, actually, how much intellectual edifice we build around these things, and then what nudges you in the direction, or, you know, and gets you to then re-examine the arguments, right? Because you said yourself that you look back at arguments, and Bert said this as well, like, what, that was there all along to be seen? Here was this, wow, how could I not have appreciated the force of this before? And sometimes it just takes something happening in your life. It's always interesting to me.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And I think it goes back to what Bert said also about, and this happened with me certainly when you first deconvert, kind of trying to rummage together really good reasons for why you've deconverted, and you come up kind of short because a lot of it is stuff that happens to you. It's existential, and you can muster these reasons, but then, you know, like I remember when it first happened to me, I think it may have actually been Scott, Theoretical Bullshit. When I talked to him, I mean, I asked, it was like purely, like the questions were purely cerebral, like, well, what about this argument? What about that argument? And I was sitting there like, well, God, I'm still kind of convinced by Kalam. I'm still kind of convinced by the moral argument and the teleological argument. I mean, yeah, I doubt the premises. I doubt them a little more. I'm a little, they're on shakier ground. But I could still, like, put a good argument together for you for why, you know, maybe this argument is true and should be believed. So it was kind of embarrassing. It was like, I want to give you some real robust, like, I would like to have a book in front of you with all the intellectual reasons that I can offer you for why I don't believe this stuff anymore. But it's hard. It's kind of hard to give that. And over time, you start to sort of Monday morning quarterback and be able to read in the intellectual stuff that was going on maybe behind the scenes. But you're absolutely right. Conversion and deconversion are, for the most part, inherently existential and spiritual, if you want to use that word loosely. And oftentimes, very little of this, I think, is purely intellectualized work that's happening, either in the faith or outside of the faith. By the way, I love to ask presuppers how many people have been converted into Christianity through their arguments. It's one of my favorite questions, because it's still zero. The answer is still zero whenever I ask them. All of them, every single one. So,
I mean, I'm a Christian, and I haven't met a presupper that said that somebody said, "Oh my gosh, I'm coming to faith from this argument."
Tag.
Yeah. But young Earth creationists actually do score sometimes, and so do anybody that's existential does. Anybody, sure. Yeah. But when it comes to, usually it's the existentialist that does. But when it comes to precept, I don't know. I talk to church people all the time. I haven't met one.
But yeah, you can understand.
They just call it seed lane, and they call it a kind of a stopgap, right?
It's an excellent. Yeah, you have to get in first, and then once you're in and you adopt the precept, it locks you in. Like it's great insulation.
Yeah, probably the best insulation. But you're right about young earthers, right? I mean, you can go to a Kent Hovind seminar, and you hear the gospel at the end, right? You hear all these reasons to think that the Earth is like 5 seconds old, you know, and then you know, and then at the end there's an altar call, right? So yeah, I think you're right. That makes sense. Actually, now that I think about it, I know someone who would probably characterize his conversion to Christianity as in part having to do with Kent Hovind. So you're absolutely right. Now, side 10, I don't know if that's going to happen. It's not gonna happen anytime soon.
I was trying to remember. There's something we were saying right before that I was going to chime in on, and I can't remember what it is now. But thanks, Spackle.
I'm sorry.
It's my birthday. Come on, damn it.
Happy birthday.
No. Oh, thank you. Finally, somebody.
This hangout will be forever remembered as the hangout where Bert lost all of his memories because of his age.
Bert got me a mug for my birthday. I got him nothing.
You set a record in this hangout for number of analogies.
They were all good, though.
Yeah, they were all good, as long as they're good. Yeah.
Hey, Helena's back.
Ozzy, did you want to hit one of your topics?
Well, Helena's back, and I know that she had some questions, so I'd like to defer to her if I may.
Let's see.
But she's muted.
No, I'm here. I was just, I don't know, this is going to change the subject entirely, but I'm just wondering, when you look back at the videos that you had made,
mm-hmm.
do you have moments where you're like, that right there, that spot right there, I didn't really buy what I was saying? And if you do, I'd be really interested in that, because I've only been able to see a couple. Like I've looked at your Vimeos because Bert.
Oh my God, I forgot about those. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're just really good. Like I kind of wish you were still a Christian. Right. Right. But I'm thinking he's looking at that now. Like there are moments when I watch a Christian apologetic trying to explain something, and it's like you can see that they're struggling, and that there are these little pieces that they that they gloss over, or they go real fast, or something like that. And unfortunately, there aren't very many videos left of you. But I'm wondering, when you look at them now, do you have memories of what you were feeling when you were saying that? And so that's kind of what I'm really kind of interested in, is sort of when you watch what you were doing, do you see anything in retrospect that you didn't see or didn't even know beforehand?
Sure. Some videos I would say yes to that. I think maybe a better way for me to describe it would be to say I can look back on my videos and see myself giving arguments that at the time I would say I know what they're going to say to this, and some of those things that I knew they were going to say I was going to respond to, and then others I wasn't going to respond to because I was still chewing on them, or I know that they're good arguments. I know that they're good responses. I don't think I ever made a video where I look back and I go, oh, I know that when I wrote that it was utter bullshit. I don't think it's that far, but I can certainly at least peg a couple videos where I had sincere doubts of arguments that I was pushing forward, especially towards the latter end of my videos. Some of my videos to Scott have those, where I would make an argument, and his arguments tended to be very airtight. I mean, the things that he was saying made a lot of sense. And I think he was smart enough to know what I would say. I don't know if you've ever seen some of Scott's videos, but he knows, I know it now. I know you're going to say this. Like, I know that the response is this, right? And that's a really good way to dialogue and interact with people. And I made responses where I felt like my response to him was not necessarily bullshit, and no pun intended. It wasn't theoretical, but it wasn't necessarily bullshit. It was just I was way less confident in it, and I still presented it anyway. Maybe that's like kind of the furthest I would take that. I'm kind of hard pressed to think of what videos specific. Yeah, actual bullshit. Correct, not theoretical. I'm hard pressed to think of what videos specifically those were. I think maybe, actually, now that I think about it, there was one on, and I think he still has it up, and my response may be somewhere online. If not, I can always upload it. I think it was either Omni versus Omni, being omniscient versus omnipotent. My response to that. That may have been the one that I'm thinking of. But rarely happens, to be honest with you. Like, I can't really peg any specific videos where I knew I was like, no, I really don't believe this, but like for the sake of being the Noah the apologist, being Veritas48, I'm going to present it. Does that make sense? I try to at least keep myself somewhat honest when I made my videos. To me, that was a kind of an honesty thing. Like, if I doubted something, if I talked about it in my video, I would say I'm less certain of this thing, but I'm going to present it anyway. And there were some times where I just didn't do that towards the latter end of my videos. So I hope that kind of answered your question.
Yeah, it does. One of the interesting things. Oh, go ahead. Whoever that was. Okay, so one of the interesting things watching Vimeo, your Vimeos, is that like some of your God is Dead video, I can't tell, and on Vimeo it doesn't have the dates. I can't tell if your God is Dead video, or at least the one that still survives on Vimeo, where you were in your journey, as they say, when I watched that, right? Because everything, very much of what you say in that video, I hear like echoed in what David Silverman says. We're doing a little David Silverman review, and it's quite similar. And I find that interesting. That seems to be a quality that you must have always had, right?
Yeah,
that it was impossible to know, really, because you were... I think there's something good about that. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think the Vimeo videos I made, I think I made 3 of them, and most of them were about Nietzsche's influence on me. I think that's the God is Dead video that you're responding to, or you're talking about.
Yes.
I think that was like during my deconversion. I think I actually made those videos somewhere in between my Christian and my jump from Christianity to atheism. I think those were like maybe the only content I made during the time period where I struggled with that sort of thing, where I was like, I gotta make something. Like, I was reading Nietzsche and just blown away, and I was like, I gotta do something. Like, I can't just keep this in, right? Like, as I wrote all these scripts out, and I didn't necessarily even intend to do a video, but I just like really wanted to just talk and say these things and get it out there, and it was a very cathartic experiences. So if I remember correctly, I don't even remember what account that was on my Vimeo. I need to go back and look, but yeah, I remember writing, I think, a little bit about, you know, the removal of God as the sort of basis for meaning and value in a culture, sort of taking Nietzsche's concept of the death of God and then applying it like personally to me, right, and finding radical new conceptions of who you are, self-creation, right, like sort of once you pass over, you pass through the Rubicon, as it were, and like you're there and you have to figure out what to do now. Nietzsche served as a real roadmap for me to sort of find out who I was in the process of deconverting, to sort of be okay with destroying and dethroning God and destroying canons and finding out where the hell to go from there in terms of like my moral beliefs, my ethical, moral and ethical beliefs, my beliefs about meaning and value, my beliefs about not necessarily the Christian God existing, but a deist God existing, what that means for my life, what that means for my marriage. All of those things were questions that Nietzsche allowed me to sort of frame in a much better way. He didn't necessarily give me answers. I didn't even think I was looking for answers. I don't look at Nietzsche as someone who gave me answers and made me become an atheist. I look at Nietzsche as kind of a bridge into my atheism, helping me get there. And so I think during that time, I think I made 3 videos. Now that I'm thinking about it, I made 3 videos. One is on God's death. The other is on the will to power. And the third one was about Christianity. Like I was critiquing Christianity from kind of a Nietzschean perspective, if I remember correctly. I gotta go back and look at these. But if I'm not mistaken, that was right around the time I was having my existential crisis, as it were.
I have a suggestion for a video. This must have occurred to you, and someone surely must have suggested it before. But have you ever considered? You see, if I recall correctly, you had a 5 questions for atheists. From have you ever considered doing a response video to your own video, answering your own question?
Oh yeah. We actually talked about that earlier. I've been working on it.
Ozzy must have dozed off earlier.
Yeah.
What's that? I must have. I'm in my dotage. It happens.
that happens at 53.
I'm not there yet.
This is going to be the most depressing birthday for Bert afterwards. Like all these conversations about getting older and forgetting things. Oh God. Yeah. I do actually. I've been saying this for a year. So all my friends think I'm just completely bullshitting at this point. Because I've been saying it for over a year that I'm going to make a video doing that. But I actually have something already in the works for like my 5 questions. And then those aren't really the super important ones to me. Like the 5 questions ones, they're not really they weren't really provocative questions to me. I don't think. I think the ones that are the most meaningful to me are the ones where I address. I think I actually made a video where I took that age-old stupid-ass saying about like life without God and without ultimate meaning and ultimate value is like shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. You ever heard of that?
Yeah, I remember you saying those words. I was angry. That was one of the things I said. I got to make a video about this, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know how to do it. But I remember that. I remember you saying that. That's
the one I'm going to be responding to. And the best response, by the way, anyone ever gave to me for that is why they asked me why did you characterize it as shuffling deck chairs? Why not playing a beautiful song? Mm-hmm. And that stuck with me. Like that stuck with me for years. That response. And I just ignored it. Right? It was just like a comment on one of my videos. I don't even know who said it. It's amazing how those things stick with you because there was a really good argument somewhere in there. You know what I mean? But yeah, so I'm making responses to those videos because it's like now I kind of know. Like I have my own answers for those. Dumbass Veritas48. God. So yeah, I do plan on doing that. I'll share it with you guys if you guys are interested. Hopefully do it before the end of the year.
One more quick question. One more quick question about all that. You, if I recall correctly, you and Scott, Theoretical Bullshit, had a back and forth on a blog. I can't remember. What was it called?
Tuesday afternoon.
Tuesday afternoon. That's what it was. Yeah, I remember Theo Warner was in there and stuff like that. I really liked that actually. I think that was sort of very much, under-noticed that venture. I quite liked it. But I remember you had a really interesting exchange there. Was that sort of a critical factor in your deconversion? Because I felt when I was reading that like I could see the ground shifting beneath your feet, but I don't know if I was right about that.
So that exchange with him and I think without a doubt he won. I mean, if there was there's something like a debate, I guess you could call it, but it was an exchange in which I just was completely wrong in what I was presenting. And the more I had that conversation with him, the more I felt convinced that the perspective he was offering me, I think we were talking about Kalam at the time, he was just dead on, and my views had lots of problems. And if I remember correctly, the way that ended He basically had the last post, and I just like didn't write anything else. I mean, I reached out to him. I was like, dude, I don't have time. Like, but in the reality, I was like, if I write anything else, this is gonna butter up his ego if he ever watches this. If I write anything else, like I feel like I'm just gonna have to concede to most of his points. I really don't think that had like a damn thing to do with my deconversion, though. I'll be complete. I mean, if it did, I would be honest with you. I would tell you, and I would tell him, despite the fact that it would boost his ego a ridiculous amount. Like I just, it really didn't. He could have been completely right in everything, and that one premise of the Kalam could, you know, be completely unjustified, and I still would have argued for the Kalam for other reasons. I still would have had my faith. I really can't peg a single person with pushing me to into my unbelief. It may be a collective thing. I may have mentioned this earlier. It might be a collective thing with a lot of the great YouTubers that sort of behind the scenes, like I said, maybe much less confident. Garrett, Mitch, Scott, Theoretical Bullshit, Michael Payton, Urban Elf, Adam, Randy Helserman. I don't know if you guys remember Randy Helserman. So those sorts of folks. Azrianok, who I actually got to meet. I don't know if you guys know who that is.
I remember the name.
So yeah, now I'm the old one. It doesn't matter if I'm one of the youngest people in the group. I'm actually the oldest. I'm like the old YouTuber now. So now I feel
you are.
This is awful. Yeah. So you know, Scott's influence was. I mean, it was part of a larger influence, I think, of people on YouTube who gave me a lot of good reasons to think about the arguments I was presenting, and I came to the conclusion that a lot of them were just littered with problems, and my apologetics was becoming, how many hoops can I jump through in order to justify like this one freaking premise of an argument that has tons of problems. Does that make sense? So it's kind of a collective thing, I think.
Okay, well, that's good. That's interesting because I don't know why, but while I read that, I thought, oh, I think I see something happening here.
That's interesting.
But it turns out it wasn't. That was not it. And if anything was happening for other reasons. So okay, that's interesting. I got that wrong. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Oh God, I gotta go look at all these again. It's been seriously. So I really haven't even. I don't even know if the Tuesday afternoon is still up or if that article's there. But I haven't. I gotta see if there's like a copy of it somewhere, and those Vimeo videos too. I feel like you guys are reminding me of things I totally forgot about. That's wild. Yeah, you know, if the shame is if Scott would have been here, he'd be taking all the credit right now. Like he'd be like, yeah, no, I totally deconvert. He's done. Actually, one of our first. So after I deconverted, it may have actually been shortly before I deconverted. I met up with him. I met up with a few YouTubers, Urban Elf, Adam, all the people I just mentioned are some of them. But I met up with Scott one day at a place in Southern California. Oh my God, Claim Jumpers. It's like this little place we have here that has food that's like the biggest portions of food you've ever seen in your life.
They're
it's
so
obscene.
big.
It's obscene. It's super obscene.
It's immoral. It's gluttony.
Yeah, it is. It is. We ordered an I Declare, and I was like, just because I'm a virtuous person, you need to take this back. I can't like actually order this. We sat there and had a 7-hour conversation. Like we had to leave the biggest tip you would not believe. We sat there in the same cubicle for 7 hours talking about nothing but death. It was the most nihilistic, like crazy conversation I've ever had, where we talked about, like, we basically asked the question, like, what's worse? Non-existence when you die at a finite age, say 80, right? Or living forever in heaven even, and being locked into like a sentient, like a consciousness, being locked into consciousness, regardless of if you're in some sort of heavenly state, but being locked into that for trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of millennia with no off switch, right? Like, what's worse? So I argued at the time that non-existence is worse, that death is worse, right? And Scott said no, living, infinitely is worse, regardless of the state. I mean, I think I'm characterizing that correctly. Regardless of just the idea of living forever, period. And so I was like, we were using like napkins as like metaphors and analogies in our food. You can't eat all the food at Claim Jumper, so you have to use them in the philosophy discussion. Yeah, you have to use them as analogies, exactly. So
eternity is like dinner at Claim Jumper.
Yeah, well, I swear to God, like we had like napkins, and we were like, this is the cutoff point, this napkin, right? And if you go past the napkin, you're now into eclair territory, and that's heaven. Like I swear to God, like that's how we were actually doing it. So yeah, we had like a long conversation about that. I've actually switched my view. The more I'm talking about it, I'm realizing that I've actually switched my view to Scott. So maybe I should just say I owe Scott my entire deconversion.
I was going to say
Yeah.
in your recent video with Josh Durbin, I will say that like there were a couple mannerisms where I'm like, all right, that's Scott. I can see it there.
Yeah.
You watched too much of Scott's stuff.
Yeah. Well, we always had that kind of, whenever we made video responses to each other, we always tried to one-up each other with snark. That's what you're saying. It's who could out-snark the last person. Who could be the most snarkiest. That's what's there. Although I will say, since like my first few videos ever, there was a good degree of snark. I think I actually started the snark in the relationship Scott and I have. I think I actually started the snark. He just sort of mastered it and made it an art. I think that's what happened.
It made you regret the snark.
Yeah.
One thing along those lines about the conversation about eternity and death and which is worse is that one thing I was thinking about this morning as I was anticipating this conversation was there's something associated with a loss of wonder about things, right? Like actually one of Ben Cruz's videos I've mentioned it a couple of times that I really enjoyed was his conversation about taking for granted the skyline that's outside of his window, and that he has to battle to appreciate it because the familiar becomes uninteresting. It as much as it loses the luster. And that, and he goes into why that is and what's behind that and why we prioritize. You know, we enter a situation and we're prioritizing the things that we need to pay attention to, and we shelve the familiar, and that there's some aspect of that that's seen in our you know, I have a beautiful view, and so I get used to it, and now I have to really focus to appreciate. And that along those lines, there's like a there's a Catholic that Spackle and others know in the community named Baldy the Limey, and he said atheism's boring, right? I think there's a truth to that, in that it's really unappealing to some, in that there's like this sense that you're losing wonder, you're losing you're just going to put an explanation on things that I don't want to know about, or that I don't, or that it loses like like the Harry Potter aspect to it, the magic behind it. And there's something interesting about that with us in terms of our psyche, is that as we learn about things, they become demystified, and they become I think actually some of that was at play in my own deconversion, in that I think as I was starting to have some of these things explained that I had just not looked into it before, then all of a sudden it was losing some of those links into this thing that was like this greater structure that was not available to me, and that was starting to lose some of its luster, or to lose some of its interest. Really? It's a.
Do you think there was less? Do you think in your initial stages of your deconversion, are you saying there was like less magic, quote unquote, to the world than there was when you conceived it as a Christian, or the vice versa?
I think that I was fast. No, because I was definitely stumbling over areas I hadn't had access to. So I was finally finding things interesting, but I think that God had lost luster for me, or the notion of it had. It was no longer. It kind of brought it down to just a concept, and it was no longer this.
Sure.
This you read if you, for instance, actually it's interesting when I watch. So I work at DreamWorks, and when I watch Pixar films, I'm just soaking in them. I love them. Or if I watch Disney animated films, because I don't see the borders of the set at all. But on our own films, I know where the things begin and end. I know where the shots begin and end. I know what the dialogue changes were. And all of this stuff has explanations that demystify, or they pull me out of the story. That it's no longer this thing existing out there. It's like this, like there's all this like stuff that just kills it for me. So actually at work, I'll actually stay away from the films that I'm not working on, but to some degree, knowing about the process and knowing kind of how it was done or whatever, it kind of loses that luster. So
yeah, it's why
anyway.
it's why Star Wars the first 3 Star Wars sucked, because they explained the Force away through midi-chlorians, right? That's why it sucked. That's a large reason why all those early ones sucked, is that they explained something that was so mysterious and meaningful and mystical and magical, right? I mean, for me, it's kind of the opposite. I mean, honestly, when I became an atheist, it feels like the world became way more. There's strands of different types of coloration. I mean, everything looked different, felt different. I think I said in the hangout with Josh, with Meridian Frost, is Therefore God hangout, that like just something simple as driving. I mean, this is maybe like a more fearful thing, but like just driving on the 405 in Orange County, like knowing in the carpool lane that if my hand, right, on that wheel goes like 2 inches to the left too fast, non-existence, baby, I'm done, right? Like,
to be fair, the 405 does the same thing to me, and I believe in Jesus. I mean, the 405 is really terrifying. This is the one that kills all the cops that pull you over. You just Google it and watch the 405 accidents. They're just the worst.
That's why I don't take the 405. I don't
take the 405.
I'm fine with my beliefs
every day. Every day from Orange County to LA, so 50 miles one way, 50 miles back. So.
I'm a coward. I literally will take any way but the 405. I hate it.
Yeah, we'll refer to it from now on as like the death freeway, the non-existent freeway.
I do. I'm like, not the death freeway. No, not that one. Well, I think it's anyone's worst nightmare, but anyway.
But I mean, something simple, something simple like that, right? Like just driving is. I mean, that's a bad example just because it's maybe more fear mongering. It's like maybe more a fearful thing, but I don't know.
No, I get what you're saying. Life became bigger for you. Like you all of a sudden had access to emotions and things that you had maybe hadn't appreciated, or there's a richness to it.
Yeah, I mean, in a larger context, I think it just made things more interesting to me. It made people more interesting to me. It's just kind of odd. I mean, it made the way I talk to people, the way I interact with people more interesting. It made me appreciate their story more. Another big thing I probably should have brought up is that I have more of an appreciation for how people got to where they are in their beliefs now, as opposed to whether they're right or wrong. As an apologist, you're always concerned about the rightness or wrongness. Are they heaven-bound, hell-bound? Are they believing things? Are they rational? Right? Do they believe something stupid? Do they use fallacies in their reasoning? I almost will say I give very little shit about that anymore. I mean, I still do, because it's my personality, but I'm much more appreciative of how a person has got to where they are than the truth or falsity of where they're at the end. And I think that is a direct component of my deconversion, which I think is one of the most appreciative aspects of it.
Even along those lines, you become you're concerned about whether they believe what you believe, right? It's I am anxious to find people who don't believe what I believe, because it's interesting to me. I had Lali Lulu on my show a month ago, and she was interesting to have on just because she has a very different way of thinking about things. Mm-hmm. For some Christians especially who indulge in apologetics, they don't, like, a lot of them, they don't understand that, or it's not interesting to them, or they're more probing you to find out how much of it, what it is that you don't believe what they believe. It's a different reference point, but
yeah, you can almost see sort of for the Christians who found out early on. By the way, I still have a lot of people who don't know. Like, I have family members who don't know. I'm at the point where I don't really care anymore. Like, I'm starting to make videos. I'm at the point where I'm going to do it regardless, because I don't want to not talk about it. I find it interesting. I find it meaningful. But shit, now I forgot what I was going to say. Oh yeah, so I do have like the automatic Christian response from my friends who are apologists was the exact same thing I would say. Like, I had a friend years ago who deconverted, and the responses I gave him were all of the responses that I was getting mechanically back to me about reasons and sin. Right, that's a big part of it. Hanging out with atheists. For some reason, everyone on YouTube thought that I just hung out with atheists all the time. Like, this was like something. I never, ever hung out with atheists until like I think actually until like the tail end of I had already started way into the process of doubting before I ever even like decided to like chill with atheists.
Atheists catch. That's what I'm told. Like, the fact that I hang out with atheists, like, I'm just gonna catch fire, and it's gonna, it's like a disease.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so strange, right? Like, it's anything but, right? So you have to think from the perspective. Just think of the perspective of a Christian. It has to be anything but the truth, right? Like, anything but a legitimate deconversion, anything but you just you know, you don't believe these things any longer, and you believe you're justified in them for one reason or another, right? Like that's hard to swallow for a lot of Christians, right? It's fearful to know that someone. For example, I did when I did this video response to James White and Jeff Durbin, I got a response from an apologist who used to be an evidential apologist, I think, and now he's a presuppositionalist. And he told me in a video that the reason he became a presuppositional apologist is because he heard I deconverted. And I was like, dude, A, you have like way too much time on your hands. Like you put way too much stock in me. I didn't even know this guy or anything, right? And so get really strange, right? But where the hell was I going with that? I had a point to that. Now I forgot what my point was. There's a heck of a whole lot of more reasons for why people deconvert than just the intellectual arguments. But like I think for a lot of Christians, there's a fear there that if this person that I hold in high esteem, let's say, like think of William Lane Craig. If William Lane Craig deconverted, can you imagine what would happen? Like if he came out and made a video and said, I don't believe any of these arguments anymore, and I think I'm an agnostic. Can you imagine what would happen? Like it'd be hell on earth for a lot of apologists. And I think in that way there's a fear there. And if that person has like something like a legitimate point to make about their deconversion, then if they really have good reasons, then it makes me uncomfortable and scared, and that's bad, right? So I think that plays a role. Yeah.
Sorry, that's especially true of Christianity because, of course, your faith is. Depending on some versions of Christianity, is bestowed to you by grace, right?
Sure.
This comes directly from God, right? So,
Sure.
you know, like did God just sort of, you know, is God an Indian giver? You know, he just, you know, he giveth and taketh away. You know, is he messing with you, or did you never have it? So it has to be. They have to find some way of squaring the circle that you can't possibly have had this.
Do you guys ever get upset? Real sincere question. Do you guys ever get upset when someone says, at this point in your time away from the faith, if someone ever says to you when you talk about, like, if let's say you're talking to Saitan or like Jeff Durbin or something, and they say, well, you never really were a Christian to begin with. Are you at the place where that bothers you, makes you angry still, or is it just it does nothing?
Not anymore. Not anymore. So you get started. Sorry, go ahead. I understand the reason they're saying it, and actually, I think it helps that I know that I would have said the same thing. If I was under the belief that I was a new creation in Christ, and it didn't make any sense to me that the new creation would then go away or anything like that. So I understand why it is they're saying. What I don't like is when that's offered as an excuse to disparage or like that. It gets to me more about that, like what it does to what it is we're talking about, as an attempt to invalidate or to disparage the point that I'm talking about. But it doesn't upset me personally the way that it used to. The very first thing that somebody said to me, the other than my wife, the first person I came out to was an old friend from college, whom I was involved with them for 6 or 7 years. There, and we were up many late nights talking passionately, both in tears. We both worked on projects together for the community and whatnot. And I called him, and his first comment was, "Well, I kind of always knew you weren't there." And I was like, I was like, you're an asshole. Like,
wow.
That was just unbelievable. And he later apologized, a couple weeks later or whatever. But I think it hit him hard. But he just wanted to take a shot at that point. But
it's like from hell's heart I stab at thee. Good Lord.
And I was still in a delicate state at that point. So that really bothered me.
Yeah. Good Lord. What about you, Ozzy? I imagine you guys are you guys look so stoic when I ask. You're like, nah, we're good.
No, well, I mean, for me, it was so long ago, right? I mean,
sure.
You know, I'm broken 50 now, right? And this happened when I was an adolescent, right? My late teens. So, you know, those experiences, those early questions, those allegations and charges and stuff like that, I almost don't remember how they felt. You know, there's a few that I remember, but even much later than that, though, I can remember sort of being a little indignant. You know, like how dare you say that there was something insincere about my belief? You know, but the thing that sort of that helps me sort of look past that and just not let that sort of bubble up in me. And it doesn't anymore because it's just been so long that I've been thinking this way, is that's the content of their belief. That is, in fact, what their theology tells them. This is not just them playing a trick. This is not just an ad hom from them. Right? This is not just an ad hom move. This really is the built into their theology. If this ever happens, if someone ever says, this is what you've got to tell them, because this is this is the only thing that could have explained it, right? Yeah. That they were never actually in the faith. They were never actually saved. And knowing that that is, in fact, what they believe, before I open my yap, I know it's not personal, and I shouldn't take it personally, right? Yeah. That sort of helped me at the time, and now it doesn't bother me so much. I think I've rehearsed that enough in my head.
Let me add one more thing. Is that the what does bother me, or becomes very tricky, or it becomes tiresome, is often in the individuals I'm talking to, where that's a point of contention. There's a lack of charity in how I then articulate things I believed at the time back then. I have to be very careful how I put it, because it's very easy for them to say, "There, oh, I see right there. That's the reason," or "That's." Look at the way you're talking. It's so self-centered. Or, you're articulating back things. For me, it's 15 years ago or something now, to things that I once held. And so I need to be very careful that I articulate solid doctrine. If I'm articulating the things that I thought, because it becomes a very easy excuse to dismiss any other point I'm going to make. Because look, I've shown my hand. You had bad theology, right? That stuff pisses me off.
You are one of the. I would almost say you are the best atheist I've run into as far as doctrine goes. Like, you could pose as a Calvinist, and I don't think people would know the difference.
Oh yeah.
I really think you could totally, and I'm not saying don't do that, because clearly you have ethics and you wouldn't do that. But watching you when you were role playing with me, and you're like, I want to argue as a Calvinist. I'm like, I argue with enough real ones. I don't need an atheist.
I'm actually creating Bert the Calvinist YouTube channel right now for you, Bert. It's gonna be Bert the Calvinist.
I was going to make a quip about you, about knowing to not do it around you anymore, but you beat me to it.
I was having a day, and I bit Bert's head off, and he was like, "Wow, I was just having fun." I was just like,
I don't need the atheist doing it too.
I just thought of something else, actually, in connection with why it doesn't bother me so much. One possible reason why it might not have bothered me so much is because I was not a mainstream Christian. I had a sort of quasi Jehovah's Witness religious upbringing, so I was always part of a cult as far as they were concerned, right? So maybe I was a little bit numb to that, right? So maybe it was easier for me to shake that off than it would be for someone who was a mainstream Christian.
Wow. Well, I hope time is the great healer, because when people say that to me, I want to stab their whole family. So hopefully one day I'll be like where you guys are. That would be nice. That'd be really nice. I think you're right. I think I just be clear, I don't want to stab their whole, just part of their family. I think for me it's like 50-50. It's almost like, you're right, Ozzy. The first thing I go to is they're locked into a system of interpretation that sort of forces them down that road. But at the same time, it's like, dude, I waited till I was 22 to have sex. Fuck you. You know what I mean? Like, did you do that? Like, really? Like, did you try as hard as me? Like, there's that side of me, and I think that's maybe the more immature side.
That's how I feel when people tell me I'm not really a Christian. I'm like,
oh, okay.
I'm like, I follow a lot of the rules, and I'm like, I'm usually kinder to other people, but then I'm always been harder on myself, and it's really funny when people make these declarations, because I'm like, I'm looking at all the rules that other people are breaking, and I'm going, I followed that rule.
Yeah.
I followed that rule. I followed that rule. I'm like, oh, I just want to choke people, but then I go, that's a rule that I shouldn't break. So
there you go. That's that. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, I'm kidding, but it is really funny. There's a lot of heresy hunters, right? And there's heresy hunters on the Christian side, and then I am very fascinated, this is kind of a side note, that atheists have, you're not skeptic enough hunters. You're not skeptic enough, or maybe your morality is too Christian-like, or it's really interesting.
I've noticed that with the science-y atheists, like the Aaron Ra sort of people. I call them the science-y atheists. They're my least favorite types of atheists, by the way. I noticed that. There's skepticism should not just be this tool in your toolbox. It should be the only fucking tool. This is the only tool you're going to use. I'm going to beat you over the head. This is atheism. Skepticism is atheism. I hate that.
That's funny. You say a lot of things that I say, but you're on the other end. That's really funny.
You both take the 405.
Yeah, I was about to say.
I do not. I do not take the 405.
The 405 that binds us.
You will get there. You'll get there, Holy Spackle.
I had a
You're
question for
starting your
Noah.
journey. So go ahead.
I had a question for Noah about all of this.
Sure.
I heard you say in a hangout recently that you still occasionally find yourself praying, right? I mean, these habits of mind, and that I can relate to, because I can remember long after I stopped believing, literally lying in bed at night, feeling the impulse to pray. And I've talked to Bert about this and others, and willing myself not to pray. You know, damn it, I'm an atheist. I don't believe. You know, I know this is BS, and I'm just not going to pray, but I would want to, right?
Yeah.
And I just know that, you know, the Christians hearing this are thinking, there's the Spirit, you know, sort of knocking at you, trying to get you, and you're resisting, right? But so I imagine you probably still have the moments like that. But I also heard you say that some part of you still wants there to be a God, and I'm interested in that because I'm kind of two minds on that one. I sort of go back and forth. Depends what day you catch me on when you ask me that question. I'm curious if you could flesh that out. Like, why do you? What part of you still finds the idea of a God desirable, and why?
Yeah, the non-intellectual part. So I think I made the comment in Meridian Frost's hangout that, you know, I consider myself like a Mulder atheist. Like, I want to believe that there's a God, but that want to believe is purely in light of being. It's not that I want there to be a God with the purported properties that Yahweh has, right? Like, that's not necessarily what I mean. I think when I say I want there to be a God, what I'm really saying is I want there to be an origin of meaning and value. I want to be given the story. You get me on the right day, same sort of thing like you. If you get me on a certain day, it's nice to know that I'm a part of a system that purports to have all the answers. I don't have to work. It's kind of like why do I want God to exist? So I can be lazy. So I don't have to work through all of the things that I'm tasked to work through sans God. Like, it's very easy to look at the world and have all the answers when you're a Christian. It's very comfortable to know that you're here in light of a larger story, that you're a part of a cosmic story, that there's an imago Dei, right? That you're an image bearer of God, and you're marked by God and His presence, and the meaning of your life is assigned to you, kind of like, I don't know, like how brakes or the function of a brake is given to a car. Right? Like, that's someone who designed it that way. There's a sense in which seeing yourself in light of that is somewhat comforting. That's what I mean, I think, when I say that I wish that God still existed. Now, I know intellectually that if God still existed and had all of the properties that I believed in when I was a Christian, that a large portion of people that exist would be burning in hell for eternity. And that's awful, and I don't want that. And I think that there's a lot of, no way around it. There's an immoral component to Christianity in the way of this, Jesus' sacrifice. I have lots of moral issues with that. I think it's illogical in a lot of ways. So I don't necessarily want, when I say that, I'm not really saying like Yahweh, all of the proper, yay omniscience, yay omnipotence, yay Jesus. I don't necessarily mean that. I think what I mean is I just really would like to be, again, a part of a system that finds its origin in a person who created things in a particular sort of way and for a particular sort of purpose. That's comforting. So I think what I'm saying is I miss that comfort. That's probably a better way to put it, and I should probably put it that way from now on.
I have one thing to add on that, and then I have two questions actually. The first thing's just an anecdote on the recent rerun of the X-Files. They did like 6 episodes or whatever, and on the day after the first run. The first episode, I posted on my Facebook, I want to believe, and then put the truth is out there graphic up from the opening credits, and trolled all of my Christian friends inadvertently, who didn't even with, wow, this is really, I got some very serious posts after that, and I'm like, I let it go for about a day, and I'm like, no, guys, an X-Files reference. And then,
they're like throwing out like they're throwing out verses, like, come back to the faith, Bert, you're so close. Like, no, man.
Yeah, you get I kind of thought maybe, or really. There are two things I want to ask. So, Truck Company in the chat had asked if you feel resentful, or if you did feel resentful, or if you still feel resentful, or if you ever felt resentful. And the other thing that I wanted to ask you was that as a someone who is a Christian apologist who is now 3 years out of not believing anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any feelings of obligation to persuade others, or to be a voice out there that is making people think about those positions? So I guess along
Sure.
those two lines.
Sure. So I'll answer the second question first. I don't think I have some sort of flat obligation to persuade people to no longer believe their religious views. I think where I would want to come in would maybe be with someone struggling with their faith, someone who isn't is trying to figure out what to do when they doubt. That's kind of where I feel like I would feel an obligation to come in and offer something like advice, or something like work through the problems, work through either the intellectual problems, work through the existential problems, the theological issues that they're having issue with, and be as objective as I can. I don't necessarily want someone to do the exact same thing I did. That's maybe the other difference once I left Christianity, is I'm a fallibilist with all my views. I don't need everyone else to believe like me. I prefer it in some sense because, you know, people who believe in an evangelical sort of way tend to vote a certain way, and that affects society, yada, yada, yada. So there's that piece to it. So in that sense, I kind of do. So for the most part, honestly, I don't, like the Reason Rally stuff, the you know, all of those events, I don't think they're bad necessarily. I think it gives people an outlet who at home maybe their parents are super religious and they're finding themselves not being religious anymore and have no outlet. I think those events and things are good in that sense. But I'm not a fan of like, yay, we're the people of reason. Yay, we're the people of skepticism. Yay, we're the people of science. I think that's awful. I think that that causes problems, and I don't like. I think it's antithetical to a lot of. I don't know. It just bothers me also.
I think it's an exact mirror of evangelical altar calls and Billy Graham crusades and Zondervan publishing. It's an absolute mirror. I mean, they just mirror each other, and I think it's funny. So when I look at David Smalley, who runs Dogma Debate, and I look at how he's kind of interconnecting and he's sort of like accumulating other people and like think secular, you know, and what is it? What's his name, Del Rey and stuff like that, and they're all kind of like congregated now and connected.
Yeah.
I just see a mirror of commercial evangelical culture, an absolute mirror, and I just think it's funny. You know, people complain about church. Do you believe? I believe. Do you believe? It was Skeptic Fence that said that church is just a support group to make sure that people believe. And I said, then what is this? You know, what are these? You know, oh, that's different.
Yeah.
What do you mean it's not different? There's comfort in being around with people that believe like you do. Let's get real. I mean, that there is solidarity, and it feels good. Sorry, it feels good, and nobody wants to admit that.
I think people can. Yeah. Go ahead, Ozzy.
No. You go ahead. No.
I was just gonna say, I think people can be. The root problem to me is people being kind of imperialistic about their beliefs. Everyone else must believe the exact same damn way I do, and I think that exists on both on every level of the field, and I think that's frustrating. Yeah, and I think some people take it so far that you're right. It's a flipped coin. It's like two sides of the same coin almost.
Seems
in terms
like
of
a little bit. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and actually, Ozzy, I'd like to hear your point before you move on to the resenting aspect of it. Before we get to that question, because I think this is a kind of an interesting point. Is I think shoot. Well, I'll say what I was going to say in addition to this point, was that I know for myself, having been very open about my own deconversion and the issues that were at work in me and the fears and I've actually had a lot of people, I've had people come up at work and say, I'm actually going through that right now. Just yesterday I had somebody actually talk to me. And so by being out, actually, when I'm going to use examining evidence again as an example, is that when he asked me what to do about his channel, because he's still like looking into things. So I'm not trying to suggest he's an atheist. I'll let him worry about like what he is. But in terms of no longer being modern apologetics and what to do with his channel, I said, just be honest about where you're at, because I actually felt like there aren't enough people who are within their transition allowing actually visibility into it or in their questioning. And I think so when myself, it's a little bit like you're I don't know how to atheist, or I don't know how to deal with this. when people are going through that, it's very hard to find good information, or to find people who went through it as well and went through questioning things, and what are good sources, what are bad, or how should I feel about this, or things like not or concerning yourself too much about labels, and being a little more loose about defining yourself, and not getting worked up about that. And so I think actually there's merits to that aspect. I'm sure you agree with all of that. I'm not suggesting but there's a dialed down from the skeptic, from the reason rally. There's dialed down aspects of it, right?
Right, but I mean, on the subject of examining evidence, and I've been trying to be like very non-pushy with him, because I feel like anybody that's strong-armed into faith, really, that's not faith. That's just, you don't want to burn, do you? Kind of stuff like that. I mean, it's just, it doesn't really work out very well for them. But while I think it's interesting to see transparency, at the same time, there's something about that peer pressure of, I hate saying that in such bad terms, but there's this pressure on either side to present yourself a certain way, or the Christian will go, well, your faith sucks, and an atheist will go, well, your skepticism sucks, or you can't, do you even logic, and that external arena is kind of frustrating in some ways, because it is such an internal fight, right? It's such an internal process, especially if you are religious for existential reasons, right? So it's I kind of see both ends of that, where I think it's interesting to kind of get into people's heads and see where they are and why they think the way they do, but also there's got to be some private life, right? And
right. And to clarify, he was asking because he wanted to maintain his channel, so it was kind of like, I want to maintain my channel. What type of content should I be putting up? And I said, just put up honest content where you're at, because that's valuable, that's useful, and I especially emphasized, I said, this community does not handle uncertainty well, and people will bludgeon you for articulating something that you're maybe wrong about. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about what others think of it. You're working through it. So I agree with you in that if his desire, or if anybody's desire, is to remove themselves from that process and not be able to do it privately, which I did, right? That's part of what I do with my own situation. Was I was like, I'm going to go away and really try to be removed and just look at things and try to determine the truth. And I think I think you're right there. So sorry, I'll let other people speak now.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it also works in Christian faith too. Like, I'm pretty open about my doubts and struggles, and people go, "Why did you say that?" Like, they actually, I've been, how dare you? I've been pulled aside saying you shouldn't ever tell people that, You
can cause someone to stumble.
Right. Yeah. You just keep that to yourself, okay. I think I'm being honest, and but there's interesting social pressures that you'll find on YouTube that sometimes you feel, I don't want to say cult-like, but headed towards there, a little bit controlling, a little. Like, people really want to barge in on your personal space and tell you how it is. Suddenly they're a teacher. I'm an atheist, so I'm a teacher. I'm a Christian, so I'm a pastor. It's just like, whoa, I didn't pick you as my teacher, I didn't pick you as my pastor, go away. So I don't know. It's just a thought. Anyway.
Well, one thing I've noticed about this is there's this delegitimization of agnosticism and uncertainty, right? Everyone's supposed to feign great confidence in their positions, right? And so, Spackle, when you say something that when you express doubts, for instance, one of your fellow Christians might come along and say, well, you shouldn't do that because you might cause a fellow Christian to stumble in his or her faith or something like that, right? But of course, if anything's going to cause a person to stumble, it's when they think that being a good Christian means not having doubts, and then they have doubts. Well, what does that mean about me, right? So I mean that's just a recipe for disaster, right? And you were talking about sort of this sort of mirroring that goes on, right? And then I mean I'm a regular panelist on the Magic Sandwich show, right? And I can readily see how that show and shows like it can seem and sometimes do serve as a kind of reverse church, right? Because what are churches, right? I mean, churches are institutions of belief maintenance and belief preservation. You go to a place and you sit in the company of like-minded people where impertinent questions are probably not going to be asked, and you literally rehearse your dogmas. You reaffirm them and you rehearse them, and if you go to Sunday school or something like that, you get taught the reasons for believing and stuff like that, right? It's all about belief maintenance and preservation, right? And I would hope that the things that I participate in don't engage in too much of that. But I know that does happen, right? I mean, people of like mind are going to congregate in places, and that's going to happen. But I don't think there's a perfect mirroring, because I mean, skepticism, properly construed, isn't about not believing in this and that. It's about questioning. It's about interrogating. It's about developing the tools of belief revision. And so I don't see it as a perfect mirroring, but I do see the tendency that you're talking about. I've been accused of it myself, and I can see it in some of the things, some of the venues that I've participated in where that does go on, and where there is a kind of social rewarding, back patting and stuff like that, glad handing and high fiving for people to come out of agnosticism and become a hardline atheist and science better and stuff like that. I mean, that absolutely does go on, and where I see this sort of as being most worrisome from my side of the fence is people who try to delegitimize the notion of agnosticism, that this is not an intellectually respectable position.
Or deism.
Or deism, that you are just a weak, lily-livered, milquetoast fence sitter, right? And that is an untenable position, and you have no business doing that, and you just need to, go get off the pot, right? But what you can't do is say, well, listen, I honestly, at this stage of my life, looking at the evidence as it's presented to me right now, it seems to me that maybe there's a God, or maybe there's no God, right? And then it can be, that's almost sort of, I mean, that can almost put you beyond the pale. To affirm a position like that is almost to discredit yourself in the minds of some skeptics, right? That can only ever be a temporary position on the way to atheism or on the way to theism. It can never be upon sober examination of the evidence, the question is unanswerable, period, by anyone, right? They sort of ignore the Huxleyan position that if you're a theist or an atheist, you're talking out your ass, right? Because according to that position, no one is ever in a position to rationally and justifiably affirm the existence or the non-existence of any gods, right? Or of some particular god, right? And that gets dismissed, and that bothers me. It seems to me that an atheist movement, I think, is only valuable not to the extent that it pushes atheism, but to the extent that it encourages critical thinking and skepticism and scientific values. So I hear, maybe I disagree with Noah, because that's what I value in the online atheist movement, is the extent that it genuinely and sincerely promotes skepticism and inquiry and critical thinking and scientific values, not as necessarily the only avenues to truth, but I would argue certainly as the best and most reliable avenues to the truth. And so I wouldn't want sort of the online atheist movement to be sort of divorced from those sorts of things, because then it would be a movement that I wouldn't want any part of, right? I mean, to the extent that it has value is to the extent that it encourages that. But there is this tendency to say, well, the religious say that morality is theirs, that the morality lies in the province of religion, but good thinking, right thinking, proper thinking, that's the province of atheists, right? And that is complete nonsense. That is BS. And that is dangerous, because that is a kind of sort of, self-congratulation that is really, really dangerous, that gets people to put on blinders. And I'm not going to name names, but there are atheists in the online community that I think are just completely hidebound dogmatists and don't see it and can't see it because they are, by definition, skeptics and critical thinkers as they see it.
I see that so much, like in other communities that I'm in outside of this too. Like it's I mean, very dogmatic. And I'm sorry, but your buddy Aaron Raw is extremely dogmatic. And maybe he has to be.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah.
I'm not going to. But maybe he has to be because he's in Texas.
Well, it's funny to hear him called my buddy.
Your best pal.
Well, it was sort of being sarcastic a little bit because you guys spar on philosophy, but yeah.
Have you guys seen the Drunken Peasant show? You've heard of that?
Yeah, sure.
We should do a show where we're all self-appointed agnostics in the way that you just described, and we'll call it the slightly inebriated royalty show. And we won't commit to atheism. We'll just be really on the fence about it, and that's all we'll talk about. Like, that'd be great.
Right.
But you guys would agree that atheism is a conclusion, right? It's a conclusion.
Well, no, it can be a presupposition. I mean, you can approach it dogmatically. So I think ideally it ought to be a conclusion, but it needn't be. And it's not a default position. That I think is just a nonsense when people say that.
Lack of belief. I don't. Yeah. That
yeah.
one,
Well, everyone knows where I stand on the whole lack theism nonsense, but as I see it.
Actually, what I was going to say is, and you covered it well, was that the problem is when it's about the championing of the belief rather than what is true, and that's when you become dogmatic about the position. That was what I was trying to remember earlier. So on the topic of maybe we could dig into resentful, whether you're resentful or not. We didn't cover that yet, right? And then John F. McDropout had a question, and then which I posted in the chat there, and then we can wrap up the hangout.
What was the question? I'm sorry, I missed that.
So the about being resentful.
Oh, yes.
About having.
Yes. So I actually made a list while he did that. I was thinking about it when you guys were talking. Yeah, I just completely ignored everything. I'm just kidding. There's three things, I think, John. First is sex. So this is going to sound horrible. Waited till I was like in my early mid-20s. I would have liked to have done that earlier. Completely like visceral thing. That'd have been great. It's not a huge deal. I just would have liked to have sex earlier. That'd have been nice. In a larger context.
Eaten at the claim jumper. So
yeah,
had a full meal.
Yeah. On the same day. That's my biggest disdain with Christianity. I couldn't eat a giant eclair and have sex on the same day. Anyway, and then I think in a larger way, I think in a more serious way, waiting till I was married. Actually, both my wife and I. That was kind of hard. It was difficult to do. It was difficult to have anything like a normal sex life for a certain part of our marriage because of that. I mean, it's such an odd thing to do, and it creates problems. I'll just put it that way. It's very hard to communicate. There's a lot of it's good to get to know that part of your relationship before you commit forever. We both sort of learn that, right? It's not just you have to learn how to atheist. You kind of have to learn how to sex too when you're a Christian and you've waited. So kind of resentful for that. I mean, that's not really even resentment, honestly. I look back. Resentful is kind of a strong word. Maybe things I maybe don't like, but it's not even that big of a deal to me. I think I'm more angry when people say you weren't a true Christian. That's like the deep stuff that makes me really angry. I would also say maybe my choice of vocation, right? So seeing yourself in light of God's place for you. You have this conception, God wants me to do something with my life that is going to something in my life that is going to glorify him, right? And so then you start thinking about your gifts, things you're good at, and those don't necessarily equate to things you want to do with your life, right? So there's these struggles with like, what do I want to do? Who do I want to be? And who do I want to be vocationally in light of my commitment to Jesus, right? If you take your faith seriously, these are things you think about. So I think early on I made choices. I ended up getting my bachelor's in psychology. I worked as a substance abuse counselor for a while at a prison. So I was thinking to myself, my parents had this problem. I want to help people not have that problem. Ended up being something I hated. I didn't really make a huge impact. So I ended up going a completely different road. And I kind of credit that to Jesus. Damn you, Jesus. I worked in a prison. The biggest thing is probably philosophy. Enjoying philosophy as philosophy is what I put down. Like I think I mentioned this earlier, that I never really read philosophers and let their ideas ruminate and just sit and boil and soak in. I used them as means to argue, and that sucked. I now that I've now that I've kind of moved out of the faith, I'm just falling in love with the existentialists. I'm falling in love with Nietzsche. I'm falling in love with reading philosophy for philosophy and finding myself in it. I wish I would have done that years ago, right? I wish I would have read Nietzsche when I was 17. I'd probably have punk hair, mohawk, you know, having lots of eclairs and sex. It'd be great. But yeah. So enjoying, that's probably the biggest one. Biggest resentment is not being able to appreciate philosophy in a way that I would have been able to if I wasn't using it as a means to an end. Yeah.
Let me just add one more question. Was John had asked about if you missed the experiential aspects in terms of, I assume, I don't think it was, you had asked him if it was about worship. I guess it could be about worship and the singing and whatnot, but maybe the exaltation or the enrapturedness, the enraptured quality that comes with it, the heightened emotion, or if that is something that is different for you.
No, I think it's just a matter of finding new things for that. I think it's realizing what that is, realizing that. I mean,
masturbation.
Yeah, that's really it's funny. I had a conversation when I first deconverted with Urban Elf Adam on YouTube in person, and I met him, and I'm a super fan of his, right? So when I first met him, I asked him how do you make it like day to day? Like to me, it's still new. I'm like, how do you make it day to day and have wonderful, meaningful experiences to you in light of the fact that you're going to die? There's no God, there's no meaning, there's no value, no inherent value, I should say, no teleology, right? So I'm giving him all this like deflationary shit, throwing it at him, and he takes his scotch, his little thing of scotch, and he goes, "Precious alcohol," and he does this. It was like, that answer to me stuck with me, not necessarily because you want to be an alcoholic if there's no God, but because like it's a matter of finding that same sort of joy and passion. Alcohol is probably the worst thing he could have done now that I think about it. But the idea that I took from that was finding the next God, right? Like Nietzsche has this thing about, after the death of God, what new games must we invent? And to me, that means finding new conceptions of things that used to give us these deep-seated feelings and emotions, these powerful experiences. And so that's really like the goal right now for me, is to find these things that give me that. I think the way he put it was like a visceral, emotional, powerful thing to me. So that's really the struggle. I really don't know. I really don't know if I found what that is yet. But I know that I'm not dumb enough to think that removing God from the equation, especially this early on in my deconversion, doesn't mean that I haven't replaced him with something else. And so, like, it's a matter of slowly finding what that's going to be, what I place at the foundation, and that I build everything else on, all of my other views and things. So yeah, I mean, like in a really like blunt way, like, yeah, fapping. That's my answer. I'm just gonna go with fapping. I'm gonna change everything I just said and just say fapping. That's it.
Along those lines, and Helena mentions nature, but yeah, Ozzy and I had a conversation 2 weeks ago about something along those lines in our bubble hangout. I just yesterday when I was walking, I go for a walk at lunch every day, and I'll listen to like a lecture, or sometimes sometimes I'll get a feeling of richness when I'm walking in the sun along the. It's going to sound terrible, but along the LA River, which is beautiful in places.
It's not a river.
It is actually officially a river. It is a river. It's officially a river. I'm sorry, they ruled on it. They ruled on it like 8 years ago. It is a river.
It is beautiful when they're pulling out the bodies, and you get to see like.
Yes.
It's the beautiful part, right? Yeah.
First of all, it's dry most of the time. Second of all,
it's just a river
it's a freaking trench, okay? It's a gutter.
It's a river that you can get shopping carts at.
Oh my God.
Regularly, you can pull them out of it. But actually the bend that is right behind DreamWorks isn't bad. It's right against Griffith Park. It's a pretty gorgeous little spot. But I'll go walking, and the mountains, the Pasadena Mountains are right there, and there's a rich quality to that, and I've had that experience. For some reason this year, I've been more and more having these moments where I'll just look over at my wife and I'm like, man, life is so rich. Like, it is really, it kills me. It knocks me over, how some of those things are. So I don't think that's changed for me. So in that regard. So did anybody else have anything else to add, and we can wrap this up? I'm deprived and depraved. Yes. There's been a very active side chat internal that has been quite humorous. We had a good conversation about food and sex.
That's a West Side Story line. I'm depraved because I'm deprived. Yeah, good one.
At one point, I typed "Focus Noah" or something. I could see him cracking up. So anyway, man, what a great hangout. What a great conversation.
Thank you for having me.
I hope we have more interactions in the future. I really enjoyed everybody's contributions. But I knew I was going to really enjoy this conversation when I saw your the last few appearances. Just seeing you talk about your positions and whatnot, I was like, oh, he and I share a lot of experiences, and it'll be interesting to talk to you. So it's been a pleasure getting to know you this last couple of weeks. And
yeah, totally. Thank you for the opportunity. You're right. Like I feel like our experiences mirrored in a lot of different ways, and I appreciate the opportunity to come on and kind of talk about it a little bit. It's my first time like really kind of opening up on camera for just talking about it in the way I have. So I really appreciate it. You guys are awesome. We should do more hangouts together.
Let me just say this funny thing is that I didn't know. I figured Noah got bombarded after the recent interactions, and so I sent him this message probably in early January or something, and I'm like, hey Noah, I'm a CG supervisor at DreamWorks. That's completely irrelevant to what I'm about to tell you, but I figured.
When I read that sentence, I was like, what? I had no idea what was going to come next. I was like, what does that mean? Like,
it worked for me. He approached me and was like, "You should interview me." By the way, I work at DreamWorks. I'm like, okay.
It's a good
fanatic. Go ahead.
It's like the envelopes you get. You won $1 million.
That's the only reason I chose you. The other ones are like, Noah, hi, I work at Walmart. I was like, no, delete. Noah, hi, I work on the. Yeah, I just like, no. DreamWorks, reply, baby. That's it.
You could flatter me if you got any other film studios and turn them down. I didn't notice. I didn't lead with it. Hey Noah, I worked on Shark Tale.
Oh yeah, right. or Lionsgate pass.
So if you YouTube this, can't believe I'm telling you this. If you YouTube Everybody Sunshine, the music video, David Hasselhoff, I am on that music video. I am also on that music. I am on that music video as a kid. I'm all over it. So I'll just throw that out there.
Wow.
Yeah. You are privileged to have me. I was on a David Hasselhoff music video. So, I'll sign your stuff later. Okay. Give me my autograph later. But yeah.
You didn't drink. You didn't take your shirt off and eat hamburgers with him, drunk on.
I did not. God Almighty.
Well, it's not on tape anyway.
Yeah.
By the way, you're just giving me Photoshop fodder right here. So.
Oh, he's so gonna get you with that now.
That's it. Why did I say that? I should have responded in the email like, yeah, you work for DreamWorks. You're talking a Hasselhoff sidekick right here, buddy. Yeah, please don't do that. I would cry. And you do them so well. Like it's kind of sick. Like how good you're photoshopping it. Kind of ridiculous.
How fast? It's weird.
Yeah.
Someone makes a joke 2 hours later. It's all over the internet.
That's so awesome. I sent him a request for this. I was like, if I'm on your show, I have to have Doctor Who. You have to use Doctor Who for me, and he did it perfectly.
I'll send you the Ozzy in the Hangout used Pamela Anderson dying on the ski slopes, and then it was about the death of Judas, and that's two different descriptions of their death. And Ozzy, of course, having no movie references for the last 15 years, has to harken back to Pam Anderson, and I'm sure Seamus is like, who the fuck is that?
That is so awesome.
That's such a random name. Why did he pick that name? And Pam, and he tells this story of Pam Anderson dying on the ski slopes, and then they put her into an ambulance, and the ambulance explodes later, and they report that she died twice. And so immediately I whipped up a Photoshop of a movie poster starring Ozymandias and Pam Anderson called "Death on the Red Dead Slopes" or something like that.
I have got to see that. That is awesome.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, when I saw your videos, the first thing I saw was the thumbnails, and I was just like, oh my god, like the thumbnails are pro.
has really worked for those 275 subscribers I have.
Whom you can name.
Yes. Some of them are no longer active, but they still matter to me.
He gets half of us just because we're movie fans or into animation or something. Like we're just like, oh, subscribe.
Oh, that's what I was going to tell you, Bert, actually. So it's super off topic. The first DVD I ever purchased in my life, first DVD ever, was Ants.
Really? Nice.
Yes.
So Ants, actually, the first Shrek has, so my I started putting my kids' initials in the films I was really proud of. So my credit is Bert GJN Poole, and GJN is Grace Jacob No. But the funny thing is, one of my producers after How to Train Your Dragon comes up to me, he's like, "What the hell is your middle name?" So anyway, cheers. It was very, very nice chatting with you. I'm going to end the live broadcast now. And thank you to the audience, and thank you to Noah. So cheers.